Okay, I think we can get started. The time is now 5:33. Welcome, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to tonight's public hearing of the City of Melrose Traffic Commission. Consistent with allowances provided by the Massachusetts Open Meeting Law as a result of actions of Governor Baker on June 16th, 2021, signing into law an act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency. This public hearing, like public meetings of the Traffic Commission, is being held in an entirely virtual remote format through our WebEx video conferencing platform. As there are no separate state laws or rules of the Traffic Commission requiring the holding of this hearing differently, the Commission is holding this hearing through this usual virtual format. Tonight's public hearing is being held pursuant to the requirements of Section 4 of Chapter 76 of the Massachusetts Acts of 1998, after receipt of a public petition signed by more than 25 registered voters of Melrose objecting to the rules, regulations, and votes adopted by the Melrose Traffic Commission at our October 28th, 2021 public meeting. Specifically, the purpose of tonight's public hearing is to take in public testimony, information, and documents and exhibits as to the following votes made on October 28th. And I'm going to read these directly from the agenda, which mirrors the wording from the petition that was submitted. Number 1, changing parking on the west side of Main Street southbound from about 244 Main Street, continuing south to Sylvan Street. Number 2, adding dedicated bike lanes on the east side of Main Street northbound from 338 feet north of the Melrose Malden city limit to Mount Vernon Street. Number 3, adding dedicated bike lanes on Main Street southbound west side from about 244 Main Street to Sylvan Street. And number 4, amending the Melrose Traffic Code for consistency with existing signage on Main Street, both sides south of Wyoming Avenue to the Melrose Malden city limit as it pertains to parking restrictions and time limits. The format of tonight's hearing will generally be as follows. I'll go through each of the numbered votes as listed on the agenda for tonight's meeting. After reading the numbered item, I'll ask if there's any public comment or testimony to be made on that item. Anyone wishing to provide testimony will need to raise their virtual hand, which you can find in next to your name. I think if you right click on your name in the attendee list on your screen, you should be able to select raise virtual hand. I'll then call on those who have raised their hands to speak and ask if they would also like to be seen. We've had some folks express a desire to also be seen. If you desire to be seen, I will bring you in as a panelist. If you desire just to speak and be heard but not seen, I will unmute you and leave you as an attendee. If you have any documents you'd like me to share, which have been marked in advance of testimony, I'm happy to do that. I did receive some documents. Then we will move to the next item on the agenda for public comment and testimony. The Commission will reserve its deliberation, discussion, and vote on each of the items until the end of the meeting after all testimony and documentation is heard. As the first exhibit at this hearing tonight, I'm admitting into the record as Exhibit 1, the public notice of tonight's public hearing, which was posted on the city's website. As the second exhibit at tonight's hearing, I'm making the petition submitted to the Traffic Commission signed by more than 25 registered voters requesting the holding of this public hearing. This is now admitted into the record as Exhibit 2, and that has been distributed to the Traffic Commissioners. As a third exhibit, I'm admitting into the record the newspaper publication of those votes at issue published in the newspaper for 2 successive weeks on November 26th and 19th. There is an exception with item number 5 in the publication, which had a typographical error where I had written Mount Vernon Avenue instead of street for the limit of the northbound bike lane. Prior to tonight's hearing, I also received written comments and testimony from residents, which I will admit as the next exhibits for the hearing. At the end of tonight's hearing, the Commission will vote on the items, and these votes will become final with the exception of item number 5 from the original vote, which was the northbound bike lane, which will still require publication for 2 further weeks because of the typographical error stating Mount Vernon Avenue instead of street. So that will be, if that vote is voted the same, we will have to publish that for 2 more weeks. Any other votes that, if anything is voted differently, we would also need to publish those for 2 weeks. Okay, so with that, I have received a lot of public comment that I'm going to read in as exhibits. So if you will all bear with me while I read a number of emails, some of them are a little bit long. So hopefully it's manageable anyway. And then I also have a number of exhibits that William Gordon, who was one of the residents who spearheaded the petition, he submitted a number of exhibits, and when it's his turn to speak, we will enter those exhibits in as well. I don't want to present the items that he's submitted without him presenting them. So first I have an email from Adam Serafin that says, I'm writing to provide the following comments for tonight's meeting. I am in full support of the plan adopted by the Melrose Traffic Commission on October 28, 2021, pertaining to the new roadway layout on Main Street in Melrose. As a longtime bike commuter, I believe the bike lanes, roadway configuration, and crosswalks will make travel along this portion of Main Street safer for pedestrians, cyclists, and motorists. I ask the Traffic Commission to please make no alterations to the plans as approved on October 28th. Adam Serafin, 25 South High Street, Melrose. Next is an email from Bruce Herman. Ms. Parikis-Ellis, I sent you an email in October regarding the bike lane and crosswalk striping on South Main Street and was very happy to see the striping plan was approved. Now I would like to reiterate my strong support for the proposed plan for South Main Street. We need much safer streets for both bicyclists and pedestrians, and there's width on Main Street to support it. Biking to Oak Grove, where the MBTA has built a secure bicycle storage facility on Main Street, is currently not a good or safe experience. Designating the lanes for bicycles and clearly marking crosswalks will be a big step in the right direction. It will make South Main much safer and will help Melrose become the city we all want it to be. Thank you, Bruce Herman, 20 Bellevue Ave, Melrose, Mass. Next, I have an email from Carol Natchez. To Mayor Paul Broder, Councilor McMaster, myself, and the Melrose Traffic Commission. I'm writing in advance of Monday's Traffic Commission meeting, which was requested by the abutters of Lower Main Street in regards to the restriping of the road to include bike lanes. I live at 216 Main Street since 2004 and want to assure you all that, one, I do think the city performed due diligence in notifying the neighbors of all intended plans, and two, I am in full support of creating safe multimodal infrastructure on Lower Main Street and throughout the entire city for that matter. I've heard a number of my neighbors' complaints, and although I can sympathize, I do not think any one of us individually get to determine exactly how the street is configured, as the street belongs to the city as a whole and not to us property owners. I would like to encourage the city to continue to move forward with the plans for striping bike lanes. I would argue, however, the city is not going far enough. To truly create safe bike lanes, we should really be building out the curb to where the stripe would be and creating raised protected lanes. It is this type of infrastructure that I believe would result in the widest amount of use by cyclists. I don't believe a stripe of paint makes a protected bike lane, nor do I feel it will slow traffic. I do fear that by merely striping a lane, the city as well as the abutters will not see a diversity of users biking along the lane, as at any one point a vehicle can pull over into it or a car can enter the lane to get around a car turning left, etc. Protected bike lanes would see children riding their bikes to games at Pine Banks, families biking safely to connect to all the wonderful multi-use paths in nearly all our neighboring towns, etc. I fear that by not fully creating safe bike lanes for users we want to encourage, we will still not come out and the neighbors will feel justified that there isn't enough use. I do, however, assume this road configuration is just the start of having a full citywide plan to safely allow cyclists to navigate congested areas like downtown or congested intersections like Wyoming and Maine. And for that reason, I fully support it. As to losing parking on one side, I don't believe property owners own the street, and although I completely agree it is an inconvenience, I believe that we live in a community and therefore must make compromises for the betterment of the whole community. I would argue that increasing safe multimodal travel options increases our property values. For neighbors who cannot understand how this new road configuration won't hurt their property values, I would suggest we encourage a dialogue with our West Wyoming neighbors, especially those living on the south side of the street. The fact that traffic backs up for buses to load and discharge passengers or waiting for a car to turn left, etc., although inconvenient, has not diminished their property values. To the argument that there aren't enough current users, I would compare this to when the city built the track at Pine Banks. I'm certain that the track was built for the sports teams and not the community, but the unintended consequence is that the community at large uses the track more than the teams. It's one of the most wonderful things the city has provided its citizens in my time here. The diversity of users is stunning, and I rarely pass by when there isn't someone using it in all seasons. I believe the safer we make biking and walking infrastructure, the more diverse the biking community will become, and thus reducing the auto traffic. And lastly, in light of recent articles stating that during COVID, traffic accidents have actually increased, see Boston Globe, Sunday, 11/28/21, with the addition of hundreds and hundreds of unregulated vehicles coming onto our streets as Uber, Lyft vehicles, increase in hit and run accidents with cyclists in our area, see Amesbury, Salisbury death 2 weeks ago, by unlicensed and impaired drivers. All of these reasons support the critical need for good, safe, protected infrastructure. Sincerely, Carol Natchez, 216 Main Street, Melrose, Mass. Okay, then I have an email from David Shakespeare. Hello, commission members. I hope you're all well and had a wonderful Thanksgiving. As a 20-year resident of Lodge Avenue off of South Main, I wanted to let you know that I'm generally not in favor of the revised recommendations for South Main Street. While I support the improved crosswalk signage and solar speed warning signs, I did not at all like the original proposal for the bike lane on the northbound side with parking spaces sticking out further into traffic. The revised plan is mildly better, but to be honest, I don't see an urgent need for bike lane striping on South Main, as it is a particularly wide street to begin with. I also don't understand the need for bike boxes near traffic lights and how they're supposed to work with cars that want to turn right. I actually responded to this already with an explanation, and he responded, so I'll read that as well. But in particular, I'm confused by the proposed signage at the intersection of Main and Banks Place for cars headed south. It looks like the bike box covers all lanes, and there's no longer any designated lane for cars to turn right onto Banks Place. How is this lane supposed to work with MBTA buses that turn right onto Banks Place? And then I responded explaining the bike box, and he responded saying, I would say I was definitely against the original proposal and mildly opposed to the revised proposal. I'm in favor of improved crosswalk signage and solar speed signs. Okay, the next is from Dennis Breen. I reside at 19 Lodge Avenue. I've lived in this section of Melrose for over 40 years. I'm writing this email in the hopes that it will be heard at the Traffic Commission meeting. My apologies that I cannot make this meeting in person. The changes being made to the south side of Main Street from Mount Vernon to Sylvan Street are being made to appease a small number of residents in the city without really looking at the long-term implications being made to the people that reside down in this part of the city. The change will be part of their everyday life moving forward. I personally drive this section of Main Street 4 or 5 times a day as I live on a side street off of Main where all these changes are being made. I thought the dry run test of this a month ago would definitely open people's eyes to see this is not a very good idea. And I was shocked that it kept moving forward, even with some minor changes to the plan. This bike lane is going to make bikers feel safe for what, about 1/8 of a mile? And when these bikers are coming from downtown Melrose, where is the lane to get to this section of safety? Where's the lane of safety after Sylvan? I walk my dog religiously around the neighborhood every day and night. I see more bikes coming and going, both using Derby, which run parallel to Main Street from Sylvan to Wyoming. Derby Road being a one-way street, there's plenty of room for the bikes. I never see issues with cars, bikes, and a whole bunch of walkers who also use Derby. What are the people who live on the west side of Main Street supposed to do when they lose all their parking spaces? Family functions, holidays, or just have friends over? Will this affect the resale value of their investment? You will say no because this is Melrose, but long-term buying a house, you look at a lot of things, and parking is a huge one for Melrose. I've never heard anybody say I'm buying a house because it has a bike lane in front of it. Will they get a reduction in their property taxes? I understand that nobody has promised street parking, but to take it away from people who are used to it, even if they don't use it every day, is not right. People will still park there when going to a house. Where else are they supposed to go? The people that are in favor of this being built do not live down here. I do not know of one neighbor who is in favor of this. This is a lane that will be used maybe 4 months a year by how many people? If you build it, they will come. How is the maintenance going on the painted bike lanes on, say, Willow Street, Essex, and Berwick, just to name a few? As the double yellow lines sit now, there's not enough room at the Caruso apartments. People are already driving 2 to 3 feet over the lines when traveling south. Moving day at the apartments, deliveries at all the houses on the west side. I understand that we have to share the roads, even if bike riders don't obey the road laws, because they don't. And I believe in safety for all, but this is a straight up bad idea. If at the least this restructuring could be voted on by the residents. Now for a second image, this was Now for a second, imagine this was in front of your house and you were losing your parking space. Thank you and do the right thing. Dennis Breen, 19 Lodge Ave, Melrose, Mass. Next is Jeremy Garsinski. Good afternoon. I was encouraged to see the quick start to the repaving of South Main Street. I'm growing concerned that a minority of residents are creating an unsafe transportation environment by holding up the restriping process. The plan has been talked about for several years. The pilot was adjusted based on real-world feedback, and the decision was made to remove parking on the southbound side and create a bike lane in each direction. I expect the Traffic Commission to keep that decision. If not, the city should still remove the underutilized parking and add a grade-separated bidirectional cycle track. Thank you for being a steady hand during the irrational feedback. 23 Linwood Ave. Next is Jessica Buster. As a resident of an abutting street, I appreciate the opportunity to speak up once again in favor of protected bike lanes on the south end of Main Street. As a driver, I know that people already speed through the section of roadway, even passing illegally whenever they feel there's a wide enough section. That is, anywhere with side street parking that isn't occupied. Narrowing the roadway would make it safer for everyone, especially crosswalk users who need raised bump outs and flashing lights to alert drivers of their presence. There are safe crosswalks at Wyoming and Sylvan, but nowhere in between. Cyclists deserve safe and protected space on the roadways. I've cycled down South Main both alone and with my children, on my bike and following, and it is harrowing. Drivers often give more space to empty parked cars than they do to vulnerable bike users. They don't use mirrors to check if cyclists are coming before they turn across intersections. If you're riding in the roadway, as cyclists ought to do, they honk or swerve around you. If we move to the sidewalk instead for safety, then we endanger pedestrians. I've heard people mention congestion as a reason to avoid bike lanes. Respectfully, I have no idea what there is to complain about. I have never in 10 years waited through more than one light at the Main and Sylvan intersection because of heavy traffic. Although it may have happened at Main and West Wyoming once or twice, I don't think increased automobile space on South Main would change that in any way. There is no noticeable congestion in that area. In any case, bike lanes reduce congestion, especially on commuting ways. The more residents who feel safe biking to Oak Grove or Boston and Cambridge, the less car traffic there will be at high density hours. Likewise, I've never observed a shortage of parking on South Main. Even during the test period this summer, there was never a day when all the parking on the northbound lane was full or even close. Residents who prefer the convenience of always being able to park exactly in front of their own residence over safety of other road users should reconsider their priorities. As a Derby Road resident, I know that most of the current cyclists cut down Waverly and Derby in both directions to avoid the dangers of South Main. While I certainly don't begrudge them their increased safety, it would also be safer for cyclists and driving residents if we didn't have to navigate many cyclists riding the wrong way on our one-way street. I hope you consider all these concerns and choose to reinstate plans for bike lanes, ideally protected and separate from traffic on this commuting corridor. Jessica Buster, 164 Derby Road, resident for 10 years. Next is Joanne Eustis, and I'm more than halfway done, you'll be happy to know. I've lived at the lower end of Main Street in area of Melrose my entire life. I've got to say the bike lanes they had previously painted on the roads just don't make sense to me. The cars look like they were parked in the middle of the street, and there was no parking on the southbound side of the street, and it was very tight and congested from the corner of West Wyoming to South Main Street. Trying to take the corner was hard enough with the left lane only turn lane, and now you take the turn, and after 10 feet, the road shifts again. Not good, not safe. Definitely keep the left-hand turn lane, but not the rest of it. Joanne Eustis, Century 21, 467 Main Street. Next email is from Katie Kennedy. My name is Katie Kennedy. I live on Mount Vernon Avenue in Melrose. As a person with visual disabilities, I do not participate in Zoom or WebEx meetings. I want to thank Paula Berg for offering to read my submission live. Paula, I guess I'm saving you the trouble. I authorize her to read it on my behalf and request my statement be entered into the permanent record. I request that a copy be included in the Traffic Commissioner's meeting packet. I submitted a statement to the shared streets at cityofmelrose.org during the pilot project phase. I forwarded copies of emails exchanged with city departments and elected officials. Recurring themes I emphasized included multiple requests for the DPW and City of Melrose officials to hold in-person meetings with those who live or conduct business in the area most impacted by the lower Main Street reconfiguration. I described unsafe incidents I witnessed. I also questioned the lack of communication and notice given before the project commenced and the process of evaluation and decision-making criteria which informed the final recommendations. A virtual-only meeting was held in July on short notice. A SurveyMonkey questionnaire, which many people didn't know existed, had a specific and limited focus. The one in-person neighborhood meeting on 9/29 at Rockview in Maine was held at a time and place not conducive for many to participate, and involvement was limited by inviting Main Street residents only. Why were the opinions, feedback, and possible concerns of those who live and work in the Lower Main Street corridor restricted? Why was the only in-person meeting open to the entire community organized at the last minute? The Melrose High School session occurred only a few days before the Traffic Commission vote on the Lower Main Street project on October 28th. DPW never directly reached out to residents or business owners in the Lower Main Street project area during the total redesign planning timeline, which began in 2019. Those who live and or work on Main Street, residents who live on streets which are parallel to Main or situated on side streets directly off Main, were never consulted. Many are concluding the reason this did not occur was the city wanted to control the input and feedback they would receive. A number of my neighbors speaking this evening will detail the unsafe conditions and specific problems they've witnessed and documented on Main Street. My focus mainly concentrates on the current and potential problems that impact the streets located in the whole Lower Main Street corridor. When addressing the redesign of Lower Main Street, the DPW plan focused on changes on Main Street itself. Their recommended changes, however, permanently and directly affect the entire corridor on Lower Main Street corridor, which include Mount Vernon Avenue, Kingsley Avenue, Lodge Avenue, Woodruff Avenue, Ledgewood Avenue, Derby Road, Mount Vernon Street, Potomac Street, and Sylvan Street. Why were those who reside, work, travel, and visit in this area left out of any formal consultations? Their consequences for the entire Lower Main Street corridor would seem to have been overlooked in the current DPW plans. The traffic signal at the intersection of Main and Sylvan is outdated and not ADA compliant. The traffic light at Main and Sylvan allows for a right turn on red, which often puts pedestrians who are crossing in danger because most cars do not stop even when people are in the crosswalk. Wheelchair users, people with mobility issues, developmental disabilities, and visually impaired, among others, are unsafe at the Main and Sylvan intersection. It is also important to remember that there are significant numbers of people who have invisible disabilities. The challenges faced by individuals with mental health, autoimmune, and neurological conditions need accommodation. Safety measures need to be considered in all planning processes. An audible pedestrian signal located here should have been identified in order to protect vulnerable populations in any upgraded and redesigned project for the Lower Main Street corridor. Sylvan Street is a central part of the Lower Main Street corridor. Commuters use Sylvan Street as a major route to access Main Street and to travel to the Oak Grove MBTA station. The crosswalk at Mount Vernon and Sylvan is dangerous and needs a flashing safety beacon. The parking spaces located at the crosswalk, especially when occupied, obstruct being able to see anyone and everyone trying to access the crosswalk or already moving in the crosswalk. Drivers rarely stop or even slow down. There's been no action taken in response to repeated requests for a flashing pedestrian beacon, which is critical to any complete streets plan. Pine Banks is a treasured part of the Lower Main Street corridor and used by every age and ability group in Melrose. Safe access needs to be prioritized in any complete streets process or reconfiguration of the Lower Main Street corridor. Mount Vernon Avenue has been a commuter cut through and speedway for years. Most intersections along Mount Vernon Avenue have private and city-owned bushes which obstruct corner views and violate City of Melrose ordinances. Because of all the water and sewer work on Main Street over the past 2 years, the traffic volume on Mount Vernon Avenue has already increased. Some drivers have newly discovered this cut through during this period. During commuter times, the volume has become unprecedented. After the redesign is complete, Mount Vernon Avenue residents worry that it will only worsen. Drivers meeting at the intersection of Mount Vernon Avenue, Mount Vernon Street, Chestnut Street narrowly avoid head-on collisions on a daily basis. Increased traffic and vehicles cutting through from those avoiding Main Street are likely to cause frequent accidents. Any Lower Main Street redesign and complete streets safety initiatives must include addressing the serious long-standing problems on Mount Vernon Avenue, particularly in light of the recommended plans for Lower Main Street. The side streets directly off of Main Street, Kingsley, Lodge, Woodruff, Ledgewood, will inevitably experience increased problems related to traffic and parking issues. If parking is prohibited on the south side of Main Street, parking options will be diverted to the small side streets with few houses on them. Travel and traffic will likely then spill onto Derby Road, which creates additional difficulties. How will folks parking and driving near their own property be affected? Eliminating parking on the portion of the south side of Main Street raises serious matters for some residents. There are many citizens who live all over Melrose, including seniors, veterans, disabled, and individuals across age groups who struggle with significant health challenges. There are people who want to stay in their homes and receive support from home health workers, therapists, and visiting nurses. Professionals need convenient parking in order to serve their clients. Family members who frequently visit and act as caretakers also need accessible parking and the ability to transport their loved ones. The isolation and vulnerability of seniors and the disabled need to be considered in any parking changes. The final plans for Lower Main Street recommended by DPW and supported by the Administration and Traffic Commission need to be reassessed. The infrastructure width of Main Street will not accommodate the recommended design without serious and dangerous consequences. Lower Main Street cannot safely accommodate separate bike lanes. It's impossible to fit a square peg into a round hole. Bike travel in Lower Main Street should be integrated with shared lanes and bike sharrows. All parking on both sides of the street should be permanently kept. The previous design should be reinstated and the center line painted a few weeks ago needs to be moved to the exact center of the road. It has been a stressful time for all of us over the last 2 years. We've all experienced losses and changes during the pandemic. Unfortunately, it is not over yet. Please take up the challenge of reversing the votes taken on October 28th. The infrastructure on Lower Main Street does not contain the footage to support bike lanes as designed by the Pedestrian and Bike Committee. The design composition advocated will not calm traffic, protect bikers or pedestrians, or vulnerable populations, which I know is the goal of the DPW and the Complete Streets Initiative. Please restore Main Street to the original composition. Thank you for your consideration, Katie Kennedy. Okay, I think I have 6 more. None, I believe, that are too long. Everyone can hear me okay, right? Okay. Dear Traffic Commissioners, tonight you will hold a hearing to re-examine previously approved plans to add bike lanes to the southern portion of Main Street. This plan will remove some on-street parking in favor of providing enhanced safety and visibility to bicycle traffic. For years in Melrose, as in most of suburbia, a parking spot at the curb in front of your house or place of business has been considered a right, and the needs of drivers and cars has been paramount in planning our city roads. We are overdue in balancing what is actually a convenience with the safety of cyclists and pedestrians. As traffic commissioners, you surely know that previously approved configuration balances the concerns of multiple road users. Adding crosswalks accommodates pedestrians and makes them more visible to drivers. Parking is retained in a quantity sufficient to accommodate the current level of use. Cyclists whose right to ride on the road is protected by Massachusetts law are rendered visible in the roadscape and have a small portion of the pavement designated for their use. As I have observed to the Traffic Commission before, we should build our streets to help people travel where they want to go, and I add now, in the manner they wish to travel. Walking, biking, driving, and parking is how residents of and visitors to Melrose want to use this portion of Main Street. I urge you to reaffirm your approval of the current plan, which will accommodate the largest number of your constituents. Please read this email into the record of public comment, and thank you for your service to our city. Sincerely, Elizabeth Falser, Walton Park. Okay, next is from Samir Sayeg. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Greetings to all concerned members of this committee. My wife Eileen and I would like to object to the proposed lane changes and bike lanes in our area of Main Street from West Wyoming Ave to Sylvan Road. As an engineer, graduate of Caltech and MIT, I think such an endeavor presents disadvantages. The obvious narrowing of Main Street contributes to a traffic bottleneck at intersections such as that of Main Street and West Wyoming Avenue during the rush morning hour. This has occurred every workday morning during the past trial period of lane changes, more than 10 minutes wait at times. What advantage would this change represent during snowstorms and garbage pickups? More frustrations and delays. Cyclists would be better served by taking the bus. If this represents an advantage to the cyclists in this area of Melrose, why not extend this further to downtown and throughout the city? The cost that would be allocated for such an endeavor would be better spent in improving several other streets and other city urgent needs, or perhaps even reducing real estate taxes. We sincerely hope you will consider such and perhaps other facts in your final decision. Kind regards to the mayor and the members of this committee, Samir D. and Eileen P. Sayed, 12 Woodruff Avenue, Melrose, Mass. Next is from Steve Lombardi. Lower Main Street bike path lanes. The abutters and surrounding neighborhood most affected by this traffic pattern and parking plan were not included early in the planning process. The bike advocacy group presented their plan and made suggestions and implemented the plan with the Traffic Commission over a long period of time. I did not receive any notice of this pending plan over all this time. The Lower Main Street residents and neighborhood did not get the opportunity to participate in the planning. Now, as we express our comments, it appears that we are reactionary and making unreasonable suggestions and requests. We are not averse to bike riders or to the safety of bike commuters. We just request input and consideration. Cause and effect. Not only does this new parking plan affect the Main Street southbound residents, it also affects the northbound residents as well as all the side streets. When southbound residents require street parking, they will park on the northbound side, taking away parking and causing the northbound residents to hunt for parking. The side streets will suffer the same inconveniences as well as having cars parked across from their driveways on these narrow streets. 2, where are the bikes? Each morning I observe only a handful of bike riders going southbound on Lower Main Street. Even prior to COVID-19, there may have been only a few more riders. Why would eliminate so many parking spaces affecting so many residents for so few bike riders using Lower Main Street be fair and logical? 3, dangerous layout of plan. Main Street is a commercial truck route and bus route. Reducing the southbound lane with a bike path and no parking is not a feasible plan. Several vehicles, buses, delivery vehicles, and vehicles discharging passengers all create dangerous conditions for bike riders and drivers. Pulled over vehicles will force southbound vehicles into the northbound lane, and bike riders will be in danger, especially when commercial vehicles are going northbound. This is not only dangerous, but the city pulled over vehicles and homeowners may face serious legal liability in the event of an accident. 4. Physical features of Lower Main Street. From 244 Main Street to Sylvan Street, Main Street is a straight road with a clear line of sight. This feature enables bike riders and vehicles a clear view of the whole length of the roadway. However, because of the proposed reduced southbound lane, residents leaving their driveways and drivers entering Main Street from the side streets are at a disadvantage trying to navigate entering Main Street. Judgment is more difficult, and anyone backing out onto Main Street will cross onto the northbound lane, causing further problems. 5. Proposal. There is no need for a dedicated bike lane due to the fact that the parking on Main Street from 244 Main Street to Sylvan Street is underutilized during most of the day, giving the bike riders a wide field of vision and an open road. While parking is underused, it is needed when the need arises. Sharrows painted on the road, along with signage stating share the road along the road, is all that is needed. The driving public and bike riders are accustomed to sharing the road. Steve Lombardi, 230 Main Street. Okay, the next is from Brendan Connor. To whom it may concern, I frequently visit Melrose Center and use Main Street frequently. I would like to visit more if the road was safer for cycling. I hope the commission does not change course from the improved design with the cycle lanes and better pedestrian facilities. Additionally, as a physical therapist who has worked with many elderly citizens in their homes in and around Melrose, I've seen firsthand how improving streets to prioritize pedestrians can make it so much easier for our seniors to exercise, visit friends, and get outside for fresh air. Best regards, Brendan Connor. Oh, good. The next one is one that I already read. And finally, I have Kirill Shlovsky. As a person who sometimes bikes through Melrose to get to local businesses like Hunt's Photo, for instance, I want to speak out in support of dedicated bike lanes on Main Street. Prioritizing bike infrastructure helps local businesses and helps encourage people who are reluctant to share space with cars to bike instead of driving. And his address is 944 Dorchester Ave in Boston. Okay, and I'm just going to check. I think one more email actually came through while we were talking. Okay, we received 2 more emails, and then that will be it for reading into the record, and then we can open it up for public testimony. My name is Andy Monat, and I am a Melrose resident. I learned only today that a new hearing will take place due to the efforts of some residents to prevent the city's plan to install unprotected bicycle lanes on Main Street. The bicycle lanes as planned are an important first step toward increasing safety for all road users. As Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 90, Section 17C and Section 18C note, a traffic commission should act in the interests of public safety. The expert opinions of both city staff and the Massachusetts Department of Transportation are clear that bicycle lanes increase safety for people on bicycles, who include many children in the city of Melrose, and people using other forms of transportation. Therefore, the Traffic Commission should uphold its wise prior decision to install bicycle lanes on Main Street and begin acting in the interests of safety for all. Thank you for your consideration, Andy Monat. And then the last is David Stevens. And he states, there was a time when, due to the nature of Main Street, activities which would put you at risk would be avoided. Because Main Street is a main street and is busy, bicycles should avoid the street and use the back roads. Common sense should prevail here and not make the city and citizens more dangerous. Thanks, Dave. Okay. So with that, I see we have 30 attendees. Since this is a public hearing, I'm not sure if we need to make a motion to open public comment, since it's by nature a public hearing, but I think we will do that just to be safe.
Motion to open public comment.
Okay, so we have a motion made by Chief Lyle and seconded by Councillor Eccles. If we can just do, and everybody in favor, if you can raise your hand. Okay, motion carries by unanimous consent. So with that, I will bring the attendee list up on my screen here, and anyone who would like to make a comment can raise their virtual hand. In addition, we were alerted that there might be some people who are together in one place on the WebEx, and if that's the case, if there's more than one person wishing to speak, when we unmute you, if you could just indicate that you have multiple people wishing to speak and how many, so we can just make sure that we don't miss anybody. Okay, so the first, I'm going alphabetically as I did last time. It's actually alphabetical by first name. That's how it pops up. So Bill Gordon, you are first, and I know that you would like to be brought in visually as well as audibly, so I'm going to make you a panelist now. Okay, Bill, you are now unmuted and you're a panelist, and also so we can see your name. I don't know if you were going to share a video, but also I have all the exhibits.
Share video. I don't know why it's not working.
Okay. You may just have to start video now that you're in as a panelist. It might give you a new...
Okay.
And also, I have all the exhibits that you sent, and so if you'd like me to share any of them, just ask me.
Yes, why don't you put up, I think the video is starting now. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak. Can you put up Exhibit A? I want to talk about how we got here. As you know, there was a long series of meetings in the last week of October, and this commission held a long hearing and then a pretty substantial meeting afterwards on the 28th. I couldn't find minutes, and then Elena arranged for the video of the meeting to be there, and so I watched it again. And it was clear that you really were working very hard at trying to get at the right answer in a difficult question. I and a number of people were not happy with what the decision was. I'm at 178 Main Street and 178 Main, and we would lose our on-street parking, as well as my neighbors would lose on-street parking, as well as our neighbors on the northbound side were unhappy because they see this as a dangerous situation and as pushing some of the parking onto their side of the street, as well as they're losing some of the parking to the crosswalks that are being added in. And they think the crosswalk's a good idea, but we're losing net parking on that side, and then all the parking from around 244 Main to Sylvan. So I'm a lawyer by trade. I'm unhappy. And so what do? I go to the law, and I took a look at the statute to set up the Melrose Traffic Commission. And what I read was, and it's highlighted here, no such rule or regulation, except for an emergency matter, are to be effective for a period of not more than 2 weeks, that's the emergency, shall take effect until published for 2 successive weeks and 1 or more newspapers published with the circulation in the city. In other words, the vote you took on October 28th couldn't be effective until published for 2 weeks. We were waiting for that because we thought it made sense to circulate a petition after that. When it just didn't show, we circulated a petition. And we did it over 1 weekend, got 92 signatures and turned them in on a Monday. We worked with the city, with the scheduling, so that at least one, if not both, publication dates would be before this hearing, so that you would not wind up after this vote with another petition. And so we thought we would exercise our rights under the statute, which is what we did. We submitted a petition, which is what we did. And I'd ask you, as I go through our presentation, you hear others, to understand that the statute that created the Traffic Commission really envisions a 2-week notice period so that people can put their cases together in that minimum period. I did some research to try to understand where this comes from, and it's very opaque. I found a 1931 statute with regard to the Boston City Traffic Commissioner, and essentially these the 2-week period is in there, and then the next sentence, upon petition of 25 registered voters of the city relative to any rule or regulation adopted or proposed to be adopted under this section, the commission shall hold a public hearing within 10 days of the filing of that petition. And that's what happened here. I have worked with a lot of people who signed the petition, and when I spoke with the city solicitor, we agreed to extend the hearing out so it would be after the 2-week publication. But I would ask you to consider this. Since we didn't have proper notice, the 2 weeks envisioned under the statute, to think about this as almost a new matter on issues and evidence that you hadn't seen before. And I am going to present some new evidence that wasn't presented before. First, I've been hearing from some people in the city administration that refer to me as the neighborhood lawyer. Well, I am a lawyer, and I live in on Main Street at 178 Main. But just to give you a sense of my background and how I come at this matter. For about 4 years in the late 70s, up until August of 81, I worked in a planning department in upstate New York. I also served on a regional healthcare planning agency that affected 7 lower New York counties, including Westchester and Rockland, which are pretty substantial. So I learned some principles about planning. It's from those planning principles that I'm a bit horrified by this process, because it did not have a balanced approach with stakeholders. It troubles me when I hear people saying anti-bike statements or anti-Lower Main resident statements. We're all in this together, and we have to find a reasonable solution that works for everybody. Let me just tell you a little bit more about myself. When I went to law school, I had two jobs. One, I was an intern at the Brookline Town Council's office, which is basically their city solicitor's office. So I know something about representing a municipality and some of the issues there. But I was also executive director of the Kenmore Association, represented the businesses down in Kenmore Square, and those businesses included the stores, the restaurants, the Red Sox, Boston University, and Masco, which was the planning agency for the Longwood medical area. So I've had some experience in planning. And so I come from this just trying to get you to think in terms of planning, which is taken into concerns of all the stakeholders. In January 1986, I started to work with an attorney at a small firm in Boston, a guy by the name of Mitchell Garabedian, and we had a case in the mid-90s. When I worked for the Kenmore Association, I had to make presentations before the Boston City Council, and thankfully we don't have some of the characters that they had then. Speaking in front of Dapper O'Neill was a unique experience, and I don't know if very many people in this call who would remember on this meeting would remember Dapper O'Neill. But I worked with Mitchell Garabedian since January of '86, and the mid-90s. We had an issue where we thought the city council had made a mistake and the mayor had made a mistake. They had fired 2 disabled individuals because they couldn't live in the city of Boston under the residency ordinance. But because of the disability and the unique nature of their house, they couldn't live in the city. And the city kept saying, but the residency ordinance is constitutional. We said, it's beside the point. The Americans with Disabilities Act provides rights to these people. At the end of the day, those people were very well compensated. The city realized after a judge said, no, they have a right here, that the city had made an error. So I've battled cities before, a little bit larger than Melrose. And then for the last 26 years, our work became more and more involved with the Catholic Church. We handled the Father Gagan cases. If anyone saw Spotlight, Mitchell Garabedian is prominent in there. Stanley Tucci played him. somebody plays me in a non-speaking role, but I had a role to play in that alongside Mitchell, and we're still fighting those cases today. And I'm honored to represent those victims. So that's who I am. I just wanted to give you a little background of that, and to tell you we got here because we feel a bit aggrieved. The law provides us the remedy of a petition and a hearing, and so we're exercising that right. If we continue to feel aggrieved, we will continue to see what legal rights we have. We'll pursue them. Hopefully, though, we can resolve this evening. Could you bring up Exhibit B, Madam Chair? Okay, so I think one of the presentations, they spoke about the manual and uniform traffic control devices. This is the current version, and it is, could we go to, and it's from the Federal Highway Administration. Could we go to Exhibit C? Okay, the manual, and this is from the manual itself. The manual on uniform control devices is incorporated by reference in 23, it's incorporated in the Code of Federal Regulations, shall be recognized as the national standard for all traffic control devices installed on any street, highway, bikeway, or private road open to public travel. That's the purpose of the MUTCD. And I learned about this standard because in the early 90s, late 89, there was a terrible accident in a crosswalk where a mother and a 7-year-old and a 6-year-old were struck by somebody who was looking in the wrong direction. But part of the lawsuit was the pavement markings were in the wrong place. And we brought in a PhD engineer from MIT, and he taught me one thing. When it comes to pedestrians, you want them in the roadway as little as possible. And so the idea of having now the people on South Main, on the southbound side of Main Street, park on the northbound side and then walk in the roadway, just statistically increases the risk that they will be harmed by an accident because you're forcing them into the roadway by taking away their parking. Hey, could we put up Exhibit D, please? Okay, and scroll down to the highlighted place. Okay. So, I think I spoke what I want to just focus on the principles of traffic control devices. The manual contains the basic principles that govern the design and use of traffic control devices for all streets, highways, bikeways, and private roads open to public travel. To be effective, a traffic control device should meet 5 basic requirements, and I only want to focus on D. Command respect from road users, because if you have a traffic device or a pavement marking that no one's going to pay attention to, it's not effective and it's arguably useless. Could we bring up Exhibit 1, please? Okay, this is a picture facing northward, basically across from 178 Main, to give some sense of, and it's very hard to really give an accurate sense, but now we're facing northbound. This is much wider than the southbound lane. And that's because there is parking followed by a bike lane, followed by a travel lane. In the southbound lane, there's a bike lane and a travel lane. I did ask the mayor at the abutters meeting to move the yellow line back to the center. And what DPW did is they moved it about 2 feet. It's still off center. And so this kind of shows that. Could we see Exhibit 2, which shows another picture of that? Okay, and there's another picture of now where the yellow line is, the center line, which is off center, it's favored to the westbound side because of that additional bike lane, dedicated bike lane that is intended to be put there. Now, that wasn't supposed to happen because the bike lane is not an effective rule yet, because it wasn't published twice. And in fact, it was defective, the notice for the dedicated bike lane, because it said in the first public notice, and actually an error at the motion at the last meeting, that it ended at Mount Vernon Avenue. And as some of the members in our lower Main Street group pointed out, Mount Vernon Avenue is parallel to Main Street and never intersects. It's Mount Vernon Street that intersects. And so it never properly was advertised. And so that lane can't be put in. Still, the yellow lines were pushed over towards the west side, the southbound lane. And I think it's within the minimal road widths that are required generally in Melrose. So let me talk about that. First of all, what we have in Main Street, different from most side streets, is it is a major bus and traffic route. And I know I said at the earlier hearings, the cars are always going over the yellow line. On the day that this happened, I walked up Main Street. Can we put up
625?
I was working at home that day, and I took a short walk break. Exhibit 4.
All right, which one did you want?
4.
4?
Yes. And it's hard to see. Can we blow that up at all, or? Yes, you see, if you see the bottom left wheel of that truck, there's a car behind it, parked on the street, and that would be the effect if a car was pulling into a driveway. The truck is over. Could we see Exhibit 5, please? The truck went down on the truck we just had was November 18 at 2:11 p.m. This bus is coming down at November 18 at 2:12 p.m. A better close-up if we could go to Exhibit 6. That's a little better to see this, and if we could get a little closer on that. But again, the bus is over the double yellow line. And now Exhibit 7, this is near my house. That was what we just saw was near Potomac. Okay, there's a car parked, a Prius, not a big car. Cars over the yellow line on Exhibit 7. Could we have Exhibit 8, please? And Exhibit 7 is 11:21 at 4:03 p.m. And Exhibit 8, please. This is also 11:21 at 4:03 p.m. Could we blow that up a little bit? And again, over the double yellow line. This is what we see all the time with this off-center line. Okay, could we see Exhibit 9, please? This is November 21 at 4:05 p.m. A few minutes later. Again, could you blow that up a little bit? Again, over the yellow line. Also, 11:21, 4:14. I decided I'm just going to go around the block, take a walk, came back, and if we could get Exhibit 10.
Yeah, I got the mic off. I'm good. You're all set, buddy. You can come in and out. Thank you.
Okay. And that's also over the double yellow line. And then November 23, how I became aware of this is, could we put up Exhibit 11? And blow it up a little bit, please. Okay. How I became aware of this was because we couldn't park on the street, we were doing the car shuffling because my wife was going to leave in the morning before me. So she pulled out in front and I was going to pull him back. And so we're on Main and we're right up against the curb. And this is what we see the buses do. This is all over on the other side. And when the bike lane is there, the cars are going to be so much closer on the northbound side. This is an accident waiting to happen. I'm a tort lawyer. Now all we do are church abuse cases. But we did accident cases for several years before that. And I will tell you that they would rather never take the money that we can get them in a lawsuit if they never had the accident. No one wants to be injured. And I'm at the point where I can say, can we stop this, because this is not safe? I understand it's not a bad thing to have bike lanes. I understand it's a good value. It's a good goal, but so is safety of the residents on Lower Main. And so when we say these things, this is what we're seeing. And on a daily basis, we're seeing an accident waiting to happen. We did not see this when these lines were centered. Could we go to Exhibit 12? This is November 24 at 1:16 p.m. This was last Wednesday. Could we get a little closer on that? See that bus? See how close it is to the car, and it's over the line? This is a little further up on Main. And then could we go to Exhibit 13? And could we blow it up a little bit, please? As you can see, this is again a bus. There's a cab parked there. That's that cab is in one of the houses with like a one-car driveway. And he makes his living with a cab. And so many times he will park on the street. And so, but even if it was just pulling in the driveway, we've got this dangerous situation with the off-center yellow lines. I understand the city position is, the public works position is, well, that's our minimum. That works, I think, on side streets, because cars, although they tend to cross over, I think there's enough room for them without having to cross over. Not every car is crossing over like we saw with the old lines, which were really egregious. This is a problem for the trucks and buses. That's the nature of Main Street. It's a major thoroughfare. It has truck, it has bus traffic, and this is the reality we are seeing. So where does the energy come from? It comes from concern for safety of our family, our friends, our neighbors. Okay, could we see Exhibit 14? Again, a truck passing that same cab, November 24, that's last Wednesday, 1:16 in the afternoon. The truck is well over the line, and see where the car is there. Imagine that car and then a bike lane, how close it would be to a car. Okay, could we see the Exhibit 15? And could we blow that up just a little bit so we could see the lines? Again, the bus is over. There's the Prius. It's my car, the Prius. I park it as close as I can to the curb. And still, they go over the double yellow line. And that's the observed behavior. And I come back to that point that I was saying, you can't have a pavement marking that everybody's going to ignore. It means it's lawless. Could we go to Exhibit 16, please? Again, a truck well over the line. And then finally, Exhibit 17, November 25. I think that was Thanksgiving. 17. Oh, it's a car. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Again, you see, even cars are going over that double yellow. Theoretically, cars could do it, I think, but the behavior we're seeing, which we had not seen in Main Street when these were centered lines, is the cars are routinely going over that double yellow line if there's a car there, and there will be with cars pulling into driveways. So I wanted to just give you some evidence to ponder and think about the safety implications. One of the goals here of the Melrose Traffic Commission is to preserve safety and to foster safety. That's the purpose of the rules and regulations. I understand bikers have safety issues that need to be addressed, but those safety issues are compromising the safety of the residents who live 24/7 on Main Street. So that's our first major issue. Then I want to talk a bit about my neighbor, Carl Johnson, 180 Main Street. And I've spoken with Carl. He's given me permission to talk about Carl. Last time I was very vague about Carl. Carl's 81 years old. He's a Vietnam era veteran. He has graduate degrees. He was a successful business manager at Arthur D. Little. And in the 1970s and 80s, when his children were young, he coached youth hockey and baseball in Melrose. He retired from business at age 55 and started a second career as a successful history teacher at Matanon, where within a few years became the department head. And Carl was always much better at maintaining his house, at getting out there with the snow blower, getting that driveway cleared, making sure the sidewalk was cleared so that the snowplow could come down and people could walk. But Carl is not well now. He's been fighting cancer for about 6 years, and it's back, and he's under a lot of care. He has home health aides visit him. He has family visit him frequently, and he has friends who visit him. And I've watched his driveway. When we had that big nor'easter, because the utility lines on Main Street are behind the houses, National Grid had a huge truck in his driveway so they could get at the power lines in the back. There wasn't a lot of room anymore in that driveway that the chair keeps talking about. They have all this pavement. Now he has home health aides. He has others who come to provide him care. They need to have access. They use that sidewalk, and you're taking that from him. And you know, he's got family who's come. He's got friends who visit him his age, and so they want to walk a short distance. They come, park in his driveway at the head of the driveway. So you don't have 3 cars. They walk, they have trouble walking. So they park close to the house. None of this was taken into consideration because no one went around to talk to the neighbors. We did SurveyMonkey. We looked at aerial maps. No one engaged the community. That's why you've got people signing petitions, 92 people over a weekend. That's why you've got people emailing and saying something's wrong here. And you know, I listened carefully, and I think this commission was struggling to find the right answer. And I think with the facts presented to you at the last hearing, I understood why you voted the way you did. What we're trying to do is present to you facts that really indicate that this is not a safe choice, that it is a burden to the elderly and disabled in our neighborhood. And as I said before, look, I'm not as young as I look. I'm 69, and you get on in years, and all of a sudden, all those little things you do to adjust, they multiply. And my wife has, you know, she has issues too. And so to come home after a meeting at 9 or 10 o'clock and ask her to come out, move her car so I can pull mine in, so then she can leave in the morning first. It's a real burden that young people just don't understand the stress and strain on those of us who are really getting into our older years. You know, when the mayor was here, I was thinking, well, like when I was 40 or 50, you know, this is a good thing for bikers. We just need that center lane fix and safety. And then I saw the stress and strain of my wife, and I realized, I said, you know, I can't think like that in the 30s and 40s. This is harder. And none of that was put into this analysis. And all of it was, you know, like, this is a great thing for the bikers, but the burden is real for those who live in this area. So thank you very much for considering this and for listening. Thank you for your patience. If you have any questions, I'm willing to answer them.
Bill, I think we're going to take all the testimony first, and then we can circle back if anyone has a specific question. Does that sound reasonable to the commission? Councilor Eccles?
I know we had this issue last time. I wanted to flag it. There's someone putting some stuff in the Q&A. I just wanted to know how you wanted to handle that again tonight.
Okay. Let's take that after we take everyone with their virtual hands raised. Thank you for pointing that out. Okay, thank you, Bill. I'm going to put you back to an attendee.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I didn't do that right. Hang on. Bill, I seem to have made you a host instead of,
I wasn't going to say that.
well, I guess I clicked host, which must have been right next to make attendee, but I think you have to switch the host back to me now for me to switch you back to an attendee.
All right. Let me
I think
see.
if you right click on your name, you can do change status or change role. I think it says change role.
Yeah, yes, I see that. Change role, but it's not giving me.
Oh, you know what? If you right click on my name
That's
and do
what I,
change
that's where I
role,
went to get change role.
yeah, and then you should be able to make me the host.
I just did. Did that go through? There's a red box by your name.
Yeah, I see the red box too.
Let me try it again. I'm sorry. See if it's there. Ah, okay.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. Sorry about that. Make attendee. This should work. Okay. Sorry for that little snafu. Okay, the next in order to provide testimony is Connor McGuire. Connor, I'm going to unmute you. If you desire to be brought in as a panelist, let me know.
Oh, this is fine. You can hear me? Great. No, I appreciate some more of the insight into the neighborhood down there. I can understand and I have some compassion for, the safety concerns that are being brought up. I grew up in town here. I'm raising my family here. I have 2 young kids and elderly parents that still live in the neighborhood. So I got 3 generations here. And yeah, safety is a top priority. It's interesting how seeing the same evidence being presented can lead to different conclusions, though. Those trucks that are cutting over the double yellow line and buses and things like that, that generally doesn't happen if they're actually following the speed limit of 25 miles an hour that's down there. And, designing the road, it's counterintuitive, but designing the road so that the vehicles have to slow down, it seems like it's less safe, but the data and the designs, the professional designs, these agencies that do the traffic studies, stuff like that, you can put a speed limit of any kind of miles per hour you want on the street, but cars generally drive as fast as they feel comfortable based on the road design, regardless of speed limit. So to enforce those speed limits down there at 25 is really hard, and ultimately, the data does suggest that just making this multimodal area, it should be the way that the speed limit gets enforced by the driver themselves, because they'll see, oh, I'm constrained here and I have to slow down. And I'll admit, even my mother, who's obviously near and dear to my heart, when we did the redesign in Melrose of the Franklin Street corridor, with the sidewalks that got bigger and this this cafe seating outside and things like that, and the bump outs, she said, oh my gosh, it seems so dangerous. I have to slow down when I drive through there now so much. And I said, yeah, that's the point. So that's really the ultimate goal. And I understand the neighborhood wants safety, and I don't think the safety is having this runway basically like an airport where cars drive crazy speeds down there. Again, I've lived in this city for more than 40 years, and I know how fast cars can drive down there. So I have that different conclusion. I support the multimodal transit for the as the name suggests too. It's the public right of way. This is more than just private parking for cars. The person alluded to a few times. We're going to lose our parking, or that neighbor's losing their parking. It's a public right of way. It wasn't invented for cars, and so we're just trying to bring some equality and make it safer. And hopefully, ultimately, they'll see the safety get there and the speed limits followed by the better design. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, next we have Leilani Nelson. I'm unmuting you now. If you wish to be made so we can see you, just let me know. Leilani Nelson, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. No, and I don't need to be on video. I'll try to be really brief. And sorry if you hear kids in the background. I just wanted to say thank you to the Traffic Commission for the original vote on this and for going through all of what you're doing tonight to hear it again. I personally was super excited at the decision that had been made. A few weeks ago, I live on 76 Linden Road. I bike and walk and drive down Main Street like every day. My daughter's at daycare just kind of past Pine Banks, and we bike her there if we can, or I take the bus. We only have one car, so we don't both get to use it all the time. But anyways, I was super happy with your decision before, and I want to encourage you to keep with that decision, even though clearly there has been some new evidence that was presented. I agree with the last person who was just speaking that it is a public space. It's more about the public safety of all rather than some individual parking spots, although it's unfortunate for those that will be losing it. And I also think it's important to consider cyclists and pedestrians are more vulnerable. So when you're looking at safety and accidents that might happen, yeah, like it's unfortunate if somebody gets in a car accident, but they might not die if it's only 25 miles an hour, but a cyclist or somebody walking can get seriously injured. And so to me, it's more of an issue of safety for those that are the most vulnerable, those users on that road. And right now it is like an airport runway. Personally, as a driver, I felt safer driving during the pilot stage where those lines were, it was narrower lanes because people did drive slower and people didn't think they could create 2 lanes of cars. Right now, when I drive down there, it feels like a free for all and people go really fast, even though those flashing signs are indicating and telling you what your speed limit is. It doesn't seem like people are following it. So anyways, I really like the original vote. I hope you stick with that, and I appreciate all you all are doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next is Paula Berg. I'm going to unmute you now. And if you would like to be seen, let me know.
All right.
Okay, we can hear you now, Paula.
Okay. My name is Paula Berg. I live at 265 Main Street in Melrose. I've resided here for more than 30 years. I've witnessed Lower Main Street from Sylvan Street to Wyoming become a major thoroughfare for cars, vans, trucks, and heavy equipment. During commuter hours, there are so many vehicles that they are often backed up for blocks waiting for the traffic signals to change. During these busy times, vehicles simply speed down this straightaway. Since the double yellow line was moved off center, large cars, trucks, trailers, buses, and other vehicles going southbound don't fit in the travel lane, so they cross over the double yellow line, which in turn requires the northbound traffic to move into the bike lane or the parking spaces. Everybody keeps getting shifted over. It does matter how fast you go, but even if you travel slowly, which I am one of those slower drivers, you still cross over that lane when you're in the southbound. If there's a prime truck or a UPS truck, or there's an oil truck, there's the buses. So often somebody is parked on that southbound lane. Previously, when you spoke, Elena, when you spoke and the commission spoke, the issue was, well, we'll just have the bike lane southbound, but with the lane being so narrow, then these trucks and vehicles and somebody who's parked there temporarily, everybody is shifting and going over that yellow line. I've witnessed for days now vehicles continuously crossing the double yellow line. If a car is parked on the southbound side and a truck or bus is in the southbound lane, there is no way the moving vehicle can avoid crossing the double yellow line. While the southbound traffic lanes may meet minimal width requirements, it is unrealistic and unsafe for the kind of traffic moving on Lower Main Street. Most drivers have become less courteous and fail to slow down. They don't slow down for cars, they don't slow down for trucks, they don't slow down for people, they don't slow down for cyclists. And by making the road so narrow, it's really an accident waiting to happen. Just this afternoon, I noticed that a car went by a stopped school bus that had blinking red lights. It was the safety of the vehicles, the cyclists, and the pedestrians is our highest priority when Main Street from Sylvan to Mount Vernon Street must be returned the double yellow line down the center of the road with parking on both sides and sharrows to identify drivers and cyclists are sharing traffic lanes. When a cyclist has to move in and out to go around a quote temporarily parked vehicle, it's causing more of an issue and they're more likely to get hit. Again, I want to stress that this is a safety issue. A viable alternative for cyclists is to create bike lanes along the rail tracks. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Okay, next is Garrett Nelson.
Thanks, Elena. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
All right, thanks. I'm Garrett Nelson. I live on Linden Road in Melrose. Appreciate city staff being here and traffic commission to having another go around at this conversation. I know there's lots of people who are very familiar with things like, of course, the manual and uniform traffic control devices in this group. I bike every day down this corridor with my 3-year-old daughter to daycare. It's our primary way of getting around town. I would love the committee to think a little bit about the term compromise in evaluating this rehearing. We've heard a lot about compromise. The plan before you is not the maximal plan that cyclists would like to have. I would love to have grade separated lanes. I'd love to have no parking on either side of Main Street. The city has already shown considerable adaptation and wisdom in responding to neighbors' needs. They've moved the parking back to the curb on the northbound side. They've, you at your last meeting, elected to remove the southbound lane in front of the Caruso apartments, which I disagree with, but I understand the compromise. The only compromise we've heard in the other direction is either that bicyclists should go away or not use this street. We've heard suggestions that they should go somewhere else. We know that Derby and Waverly are too narrow to accommodate a bike lane. Mount Vernon is too steep for kids and families to bike on. We're not talking about Lance Armstrong's here. Those are the only 3 streets that run north to south in this part of the town. And in any case, if we were to move it to Mount Vernon or to Derby, we'd just be taking parking away from those people and they'd be angry about it. So I feel very strongly that the plan before you represents a equitable compromise. We're talking about its concordance with Melrose statute. Of course, you're well aware of the 2016 Complete Streets Policy, which gives the city engineer, quote, working with DPW staff, best judgment in incorporating complete street principles, including an emphasis on an equitable approach to accommodating multiple modes of transportation. So I encourage the committee to uphold your previous decision. As I bike this way every day with my daughter, I find it frustrating that there's only a few private cars parked here. And I do think ultimately the safety of families, of kids in Melrose is more important than the ability of people to temporarily store their private cars on road that belongs to all of us and is paid for with my tax dollars as well as everybody else's. So thanks a lot. I appreciate you all being here once again.
You're unmuted, Jonah.
Hi, thank you. This is Jonah Kieranza on Lebanon Street, and former chair of the Ped Bike Committee, executive director of Bike to the Sea, and a transportation planner by profession. I just wanted to point out a couple things. The argument that Mr. Gordon had made regarding, and the evidence that he cited, many, if not all of those pictures had cars parked where there technically should not be any parking per the prior vote of the traffic commission, and where the lane has been sized to accommodate a travel lane and a bike lane. And so to take pictures and submit those as evidence of the lack of safety is really disingenuous, because the design of those sections of the road is not meant to accommodate parked vehicles and other vehicles driving correctly within the lane. So I just want to submit that to the record. Many of those exhibits really should not be considered because they're not legitimate examples of what the proposed configuration is. The other thing, and this has been said several times, but asking people to walk across the street to get to their house if they have occasion to need extra parking on the street for those residents that are on the southbound side of Main Street, is not something that went unthought of in this proposal. There are 4 or 5, I think, in the final proposal, additional crosswalks being added to make it more convenient for people to cross the street. That with the narrower lanes, without parking on one side of the street, daylighting at the crosswalks to improve visibility, and the potential to add rapid flashing beacons if they're warranted, really will make the street safer for not only the cyclists traveling through, many of whom you've heard from tonight, and many of whom are actually Melrose residents, not just sort of commuters coming through from elsewhere, which, by the way, is a lot of the people driving on Main Street. It will make it safer for the people on Main Street driving into and out of their houses, parking, having guests over, crossing the street, as well as the people that use buses and have to cross the street because they live on the west side of the street, but they're taking the bus home on the northbound. I think we need to consider everybody who uses and lives on Main Street, not just the older residents who have certain circumstances, like trucks responding to power outages during blizzards, which thankfully is a relatively rare occurrence. I'll leave it at that, but I appreciate the Traffic Commission hearing all of this again, and thank you for your time.
Okay, next is Jonathan Berg. I'm unmuting you. Jonathan, if you're interested in being seen, please let me know.
Sure.
You'd like to be seen?
Obviously.
Okay. All right, you are now a panelist.
Okay. All right. Let me first of all say something right off top. All the cyclists that have spoken tonight saying that the road belongs to everybody. The people that are in opposition to this are not based on anti-cycles. What they're based upon is public safety. And the evidence submitted by Mr. Gordon clearly shows. And if you think that having a flashing sign is going to stop people from going more than the speed limit, you're just fools. And I want to know, why are there no cameras to record the license plates of both commercial and private vehicles that are going above the speed limit? Why isn't that being done? That is mission critical, whether we have lanes or no lanes. There is an alternative, and I've talked about this for years, to utilize the MBTA right of way down right there to create a bike path that takes it right out of any conflict with any vehicles, provides an adequate transportation mode for people who are cyclists. I am a cyclist, but I will not cycle whether there are bike lanes or not on Main Street. It is a danger. And I can just see now Channel 5 or Channel 4 standing out here, when we have the first tragedy, and say, why did this happen? Why did this happen? We need a study. We need an investigation. We are telling you now, there's going to be maiming and there's going to be death here. Not just in the wintertime, not just in the fall, but all year round. It is a mistake. It is a mistake. And I've said before, one of the problems with government is its refusal to recognize mistakes. And the most glaring example of it is the $40 billion hole in the ground called the quote unquote big dig. They knew from Jump Street that it was inadequate and it was going to be a nightmare, but they just would not admit a mistake. Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative. We've got the same situation here in microcosm. This is a mistake. And mark my words, you people are going to be held responsible for this. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Okay, the next in line to speak is Ryan Williams. I'm unmuting you now. If you'd like to be seen, let me know.
No, thank you. I do not need to be seen. I'm going to share a very brief personal anecdote at the risk of further angering the traffic commissioners who have been dragged away from their lives tonight. My grandmother was, God rest her soul, convinced that the whistles on the front of her car, I came from rural Illinois, so she had these whistles on the front of her car, and they were supposed to scare animals, deer specifically, so that a deer would not run across a cornfield and jump in front of your car. She was convinced, and I mean religiously convinced, that those whistles changed traffic lights. And I would ride with her in her car, and we'd pull up to a light and it would turn green. And she would say, "See, I told you, the whistles changed the light." We'd pull up to a light and it would turn red. And I'd say, "What about the whistles?" She said, "Just give it a minute." And the light would turn green. And she'd say, "See, I told you." The light turned green. This is an example of confirmation bias, right? We go into a situation, we think we already know the answer to it. And so we provide all these facts and all this evidence to try and convince other people that actually everything we're saying is right. But there's a problem with that, and it's that we blind ourselves to outside information. So I want to just kind of provide a little bit of counterweight to some of the statements that have been made tonight by folks who are well-meaning and who have, the best intentions, but are saying things that don't actually hold true in reality. And the first is that narrowed lanes cause congestion. It's kind of a no-brainer. If you narrow a road lane from 14 feet to 11 feet, it doesn't make more cars appear on the road. Just doesn't happen. Narrowed lanes cause accidents, that because the lane is so narrow, people will just drive all over the road to try and get out of it. This is not true at all. Road diets have been shown to reduce accidents. In fact, the federal government found that they reduced accidents by up to 29%. Anybody can park their Prius outside of their house for a couple hours and go out and cherry pick photographs of trucks passing them to try and submit it as evidence, to try and scare people on a commission into changing their vote. It doesn't make it true. Bike lanes don't cause accidents. Bike lanes don't cause drivers to drive into other people's cars. Those actions are the responsibility of the people who are driving in their cars. There are people who drive recklessly on Main Street, and the reason is that they have been allowed to drive recklessly on Main Street because the previous design on Main Street has enabled reckless driving. The lanes are incredibly wide, which is proven to increase vehicle speeds. There's little to no clarity at intersections, especially Sylvan and Main, for where people are supposed to go and how people are supposed to proceed, which is why you get the situation where sometimes people decide to drive in the parking lane. And now the biggest threat to safety on Main Street in Melrose is this petition itself. And the reason is that the petition has halted a project in midstream, resulting in a design that absolutely makes no sense. And the reason is because it's unfinished. As the person who, couple commenters back noted, there's a lane that is intended to fit a bike lane and a travel lane. It is not intended to fit parked cars. People who park their cars there are parking them illegally. They are parking them outside of the context of this design. On the other side, there should be a painted parking lane and a painted bike lane, which provides a visual cue that there is a limited amount of space to travel in. Because this doesn't exist, and again, the reason that it doesn't exist is because we've had a petition that was designed to interrupt the design and delay the project. I'm sure there will be more attempts to delay the project, but I sincerely hope that this isn't true, that this is the last one. I, driving down Main Street just before Thanksgiving, had the unfortunate experience of a woman trying to pass me on the right while driving in the parking lane. She was able to do this because there's nobody parked there. There's almost never anyone parked there. And sure, you can go put your car out on the street and go take pictures, but that doesn't mean that it's an everyday, round-the-clock occurrence. This woman almost ran headfirst, driving abreast of me as if it were a two-lane road, into the police sign that was parked up near Mount Vernon Ave. So the design that the commission agreed upon was a compromise. We all wanted things to go a little differently. Some of us got some things, others got other things. I think that it was a good decision and a good design. I think there's a big difference between being ignored and being heard and being disagreed with. And I really implore the commission to please stick to your values, vote the same way that you did before, and move past this so that we can have a safer and more inclusive complete street for Main Street and for Melrose. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Okay, Steve Lombardi, you were next. I've unmuted
Hi.
you.
Good evening. I just want to dovetail and react to that gentleman that just spoke. You basically had the design all summer on the roadway, and it was abject failure, in my opinion. All the things that I stated in my letter came true. It was very difficult to back out of my driveway, cross the southbound lane into the northbound lane. People coming out from the side streets had difficulty going left to right. And that gentleman just reiterated my point. He's talking about, here's our plan, here is what we want. Again, the local residents did not have an opportunity to participate in that planning. And we keep saying and stamping our feet, we are not anti-bike, we are not anti-safety. And furthermore, I maintain an office in my house. I have a bird's eye view what goes on basically 24/7 on Lower Main Street. There's not enough utilized by bikers on this road to have this. What's so special about our stretch of road that we have to have a dedicated bike lane, take the parking away? The limited parking is actually an advantage for the bike riders. During the morning, they have a wide view, they have a wide lane. It's probably the safest stretch of road for a biker in the city of Melrose, both commuting in the morning to Oak Grove and coming home. The lack of parking or the use of the parking that's existing is an advantage to them. The people on this street only use it when it's needed. That's an advantage. But on the other hand, you're going to create cause and effect of, now there's no parking on the southbound side. Where are we going to go? We're going to go across the street. We're going to go on side streets. Again, I don't want to repeat this was read into the record earlier, but I have a background in site selection for 3 or 4 corporations. And if I presented this proposal to a corporate board, they would say, where are the customers? I'm using the bike riders as the customer. Where are the customers for this big investment on Main Street? Pre-COVID, there was just a slight increase in numbers of bike riders. Right now, I can count on one hand some mornings the number of people that go down my street. I just don't get why we can't have the share roads, ample signage saying share the road. And I also disagree with when you narrow the road that it's going to slow traffic down. The local law-abiding citizens are slowing down. The ones that are the lawbreakers are continuing to speed at a high rate of speed. It's going to take one distracted driver on his or her cell phone, and it's going to be a major issue. And the gentleman that said, oh, the old folks that have, he referenced the attorney using the buses, showing it. Well, that's real life. That's what's going to happen. bike lane or no bike, a biker or a bike lane or a biker. A bus is going to come down there, and if there's a parked car, which is there temporarily dropping off passengers, or if it's a delivery vehicle, or if it's a service vehicle, that is going to happen. What Mr. Gordon showed with the bus going in the middle of the lane, the heavy trucks going in the middle lane, that's going to happen all the time, because no parking on the southbound, in effect, is going to be unenforceable. There's always going to be an oil delivery. There's going to be, name any service vehicle is going to be pulled up. Amazon, UPS, they're not going to turn around and park across the street. They're going to temporarily park, go out and make their delivery or whatever they're doing. If there's a bus or a truck coming northbound and at the wrong time, there's going to be a tragedy. So I just want to express my feeling that the bike advocacy group is continuously making this an adversarial proposition. We're not here to fight you and disagree and stamp our feet. We were brought late into this project. In any commercial project, you have a give and take by both sides. They keep talking about compromise and this, and there was none of that. We were given this late in the game, and we got to react. And now they're painting us with a broad brush that we're a bunch of old timers, and we don't want change. That's far from the truth. We embrace the safety, and we want bike lanes. We want a bike lane that works for all. And given the fact that you have a straight sight of line from 244 Main Street to Sylvan Street, that's very advantageous for all concerned. So thank you for your time, and I hope that you reconsider and put sharrows with heavy-duty signage, and we can all get along fine. And I guarantee it won't impede the bikers, and it won't impede their safety. And it will also help people that have to back out of their driveways like me, and it will help traffic both ways, have a good wide lane like we've always had. Thank you.
I believe we just have one more resident or person who hasn't spoken, named Dawn. There's not a last name with it. So Dawn, I'm unmuting you now.
Hi, my name's Don. Hi, I have a business at 145 Main Street in Melrose, and I just want to speak as the rest of the abutters. We feel that it's unsafe not only for the bikers but for the people backing in and out of driveways if you let this go through. Sharrows on North Main Street coming down through the square. I can go on and on about many other streets. So I don't know why the big change for South Main Street. So that's what I have to say, and I appreciate the board's time. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, there are a lot of hands that are still raised from people who've already spoken. I don't know if anyone was trying to speak a second time or if we want to entertain any repeat speakers. But it is hard to tell with so many hands still raised.
Lynn, in the Q&A, it looks like Estelle McDonough is asking to speak.
Oh, okay, thank you. Okay, Estelle, I'm going to unmute you now. And Estelle, are you the one who had multiple people with your group?
Yeah, there are two people here. I'm not sure if the other person wants to speak, but we'll have a chance to let us know by the time I finish, because I really won't be that long.
Okay, if you could speak up a little bit too, it's a little hard to hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, much better.
Okay, good. This is my mother voice. Can you hear me now? Okay. I don't see why we can't use the sharrows on both sides and have parking for people who need the parking when they need it on both sides. It happens in many places. It happens down the street in Malden. It happens here in Melrose. And what about the downtown area? They have the shallows. I mean, talk about congestion. So that's number one. That's in the center lane, the line in the center of the road. That would give adequate room for parking, shadows, and also the signage is extremely important for people to really know. I'm a nurse by profession, but I've been retired a few years. I wouldn't want to go in and take care of a patient today. It's complicated, just like this is complicated. But safety is very important. I went on the website today to read a little bit about the shared streets. I read a little before and I picked up something else that I missed. We've been talking about a lot tonight. It was safety. Shared streets really emphasizes one of the most important things is safety. As a nurse, I've watched ambulances go up and down the street all hours of the day. And we're on the road to go to Melrose Wakefield Hospital. We're also, on occasion, on the road to go to Boston. And those cars, those vehicles really move. They're very, very well-trained people. No matter how well-trained you are, if you don't have the space, it's going to be a problem. Fire trucks. I talked to a fireman today. He told me he thought that for safety's sake, having parking on both sides, having the shallows, and having the line in the middle. And I said, that's how I feel. I feel the same way. There's something else too. When Megan McDonough's car was hit, one driver was trying to get out of the way of the other. When these vehicles, these fire trucks, these ambulances, we have a law in Massachusetts and it says we have to move over. So we're going to move over. But we need the space to move over without going in the other side of the road where we might run into an oncoming car or truck or whatever it is. So I really questioned, and I really would like to hear what the police chief has to say when you get to that point about the move over law and how this narrow little lane on one side is going to affect that. You're putting those people at a great disadvantage that happen to be driving down when one of these vehicles needs to have room to get by. I'm not saying they won't go over the line, but having the situation predictable is extremely important. Having the extra space to provide that. Thank you very much. I want to see these bikers out there. I want to see lots of them out there. And if they want to drive to the north end, God bless them, because that's quite a ride. However, there's also a lot of pleasure drivers, and there's a lot of kids too. But I would suggest that an inexperienced driver drive on the street because it is a questionable street for them to be on. Thank you very much. I hope you really take this into consideration. It comes from my heart, and I think it's very important. God bless you people for spending all this time. I've been through all of these meetings. I've been at the high school, and I've been a couple of these virtuals, and I know nothing about running the computer. If I didn't have someone to do it for me, I could never speak. I think it's great that we've been able to do that. I've been nice in person, but it's just the way it is tonight.
Thank you.
We get another speaker at this.
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
Paul, do you want to speak? Okay, this is Megan. Can you hear me? You guys
Yeah.
hear me okay? Okay, we have like one computer in the middle. So, thanks for staying in conversation with us. It's, it's what we were looking for all along. I feel like we the neighbors down here, we could have probably had less meetings and maybe a much more fluid transition to a final project if we were just brought in at the beginning. I'm really glad that, Bike Ped is here and they're helping make these changes and they're closely with the DPW. But if there's not pods of neighbors brought in at the beginning, it just causes polarity. And that's because one group has said from a very early stage, you have this investment yours, right? So that group starts, is working on it and has ownership over it. And then should anything enter that conversation that is different, it might not be heard. It might just be seen as resistance. We are a tiny little town. We're, one community. And I feel like when we find solutions that work, it's like looking at a pie graph and everybody's need comes in as that piece of pie. And at the center, we find our answer. So we're really glad to be here tonight. There were over 92 people that signed the petition. I've done petitions before in other cities, and I have never had people grab the clipboard and say, how do I plug in? So there were just so many voices waiting to get plugged in. And, it would have been really great if it happened earlier. I hope that does happen for other neighborhoods that maybe this project is going to go through. I noticed on the Complete Streets website for the state of Mass, they say, bring the neighbors in early so a much more fluid transition. So I know there were Melrose residents involved, but they weren't really all part of this area. I also learned at the disability meeting that I sat through with Finn McSweeney and was glad to be there also recently this month, that the Complete Streets Working Group hasn't really met since 2019. So maybe that was like a point of facilitation that would have helped us out. Right now, we're talking about bike safety. Everyone's talking about bike safety at this table for bike safety and shared use of the road. There's always been bike travel in this area. I was first put on the back of a bicycle on Main Street in 1981. And I myself was car free for over a decade. And I dared my friends to give up their cars because I didn't want to pay for oil. I didn't want to pay for oil wars. And then I got disabled. And so now I need multiple modes of transportation. Thank God there are some days when I can still ride a bicycle. And when I addressed what Ryan Williams had said, according to the statute that formed the Traffic Commission, the commission has to file notice of their votes on new measures in newspaper circulations for 2 weeks following making the Traffic Commission, making the vote. And the Traffic Commission had not done this, and somewhere in the process of them filing this, we submitted our petition. So I feel like that timeline is a little foggy, and now here we are. So great, we're still moving forward. That's great. I want to call into focus that in light of the Traffic Commission meeting of 10/28 that made these bike lanes from Sylvan to Mount Vernon Street, we're only talking about a couple blocks, and we have to have meetings and hearings and all this stuff about a couple blocks. On the southbound side, we've had more original parking on the curb, and Cheryl's come up from downtown, and then that another 300 feet was gained at the 10/28 meeting. So it's been like edging its way up. And then if you measure the southbound side by the northbound side, what we're talking about for a bike lane here is 2 city blocks. And I think that there's 2 conversations going on because of that polarity where one group was involved, so less to be very involved in the planning. No one's trying to get rid of bike travel. No one's trying to get rid of bike lane. We're just trying to negotiate for 2 more blocks. And we we feel like we need to keep the parking, and we need to have shares of shared travel lanes, and keep the parking on both sides. Another reason why we're negotiating for those 2 blocks is because the traffic is so crazy down here that it makes sense for bikes and for drivers to have, to have an intuitive design within a small space. So West Wyoming to Sylvan is a really small space. Is that 3 or 4 blocks? We're talking about 3 or 4 blocks there. And then from West Wyoming, from Mount Vernon Street, where the bike lane would now start in the middle of a road that's often traveled by people that aren't familiar with it. From Mount Vernon Street to Sylvan Street is 1,582 feet. So if you're using, say, like Google Directions or something, it usually tells you to take the next turn with a 1,000-foot warning. So we're in this hearing right now about 1,582 feet. We're not anti-bike lane. We just want the best configuration right now. The reason why, and also to give you a little bit more about me, I've done a lot of things in my life, and for a long period of time, I was a stage technician. Sometimes I was doing design work, but most of the time I was implementing someone else's design. So someone handed me that CAD drawing, and they said, there's this many lights here, this is where the stage goes, these are the measurements, and they said, we designed this with the measurements, here, put it in the space. So people had the measurements for the street, they designed it, now we're trying to put it in the space, and we've already found that some aspects aren't really working, and they have to be moved around. And that's a normal thing for, design to implementation. And one of the other variables in that's not at the design table and isn't in the measurements is how people use the space. So you put a design on a stage and the actors move around on it, and you're like, oh, wow, we really have to change this. There's a shadow here. This other part doesn't work. Let's make it work. That's what's already happened with the northbound side. So that's what we're looking for now. We're saying, it just doesn't really work. There were comments earlier about, well, the pictures that Bill Gordon showed were showing parked cars and things moving over. I met a neighbor I didn't know last night. I knocked on his door. He was so excited to talk to somebody that we walked up and down the street looking at things. So we stood on Main Street and we watched. There were no cars last night parked on the southbound side, and cars were still going over the center line. So there's something in that design that just needs to be wedged over a little bit, and it just doesn't really work. I don't know why the cars want to go over that line. I don't think pulling people over would help. I mean, the speeds are a little bit lower. We did watch that. We clocked a cyclist at 17 miles an hour. That was pretty cool. So we went out and we canvassed. We canvassed 10 streets. We talked to over 100 neighbors. I want to say probably 120. We now have an active email list of about 70 people. And I found a handful of people that weren't like, yeah, design is the best. They were like, I think it could be better. I wonder what else we could work for. And I had a handful of people, the majority of people think we could do better and think that somebody's gonna get hurt. And then a handful of people said, I just don't really care. So there isn't a gap. It doesn't seem like there's like really competing opinions. And people want to stay in conversation with the Traffic Commission. They want to stay in conversation with the Department of Public Works. They want to stay in conversation with MBTA. Everybody seemed really interested in the bike transit way next to the train. And one of the folks that lives down here in Lower Main, he is the MBTA representative of the city. He's done the space numbers. He thinks it's possible. That's definitely something long-term we want to explore. We also want to talk with Derby. It's already a bikeway. People are just left and right riding backwards up the street all day long. Bikes are always going to be on Main Street. So it's more of how are they used on Main Street? I rode a bike on Main Street for years in the traffic, and then I could jump out of the way, and sometimes I had to. So, my car was totaled on the street, and now where my car was totaled, there'll be a bike lane. So if someone tries to do the move over, they'll be moving over into the bike lane. If you give the cyclist the most width to use by giving them a full travel lane, we feel like that gives them safety. And the center line being off center right now has to be off center if there's a dedicated bike lane on the northbound side. There's just nothing, you know. So if we had sharrows for both sides, we'd have full road utility for cars and bikes on both sides. And then have that 1,582 feet that is also often traveled by emergency vehicles, by giant tractor trailer trucks, you know, as really a shared space for all. And then it opens up afterwards. It opens up at Sylvan. Seems like there's more, you know, there's more space there. There's more available space. And then for all the reasons that the curb utility was seen valid to be preserved from West Wyoming to Potomac, all of those reasons exist for the expansive space from Potomac to Sylvan. And those reasons were needing curb utility for home health care workers, delivery, parking, stop and go. And I don't know if you guys know what a home health care worker is, and I don't mean to be facetious, but that's often somebody who later in life, maybe even post-career, has gone back to work. So then those are older people helping older people, and that's what it is for some of our folks. In the course of canvassing, we were able to also find a lot of information about the demographics of the area. And while Derby Road is a younger street with a lot of houses having sold recently to younger families, the southbound side of Main Street particularly is senior citizens, a lot in their 70s and 80s, some of which are completely homebound. And there was like from Potomac to Sylvan, I can tell you that I only knocked on maybe 3 doors where people were under 65. And other than that, it's 65 to over 80 years of age, which is a little bit unique. It's not like, oh, there's a couple senior citizens. It's like it is that side of the street is a senior neighborhood with senior need who aren't necessarily going to be on WebEx. They may not email. Some of those people don't have computers. Some of the people with me in this room tonight don't use computers regularly, and so they're sort of caught in that digital divide that's happened, especially since COVID, where you can't really go to a meeting. And so then we are also trying to be voices for them. People we talked to on Kingsley, on Lodge, on Derby, on Woodruff, on Ledgewood, on Sylvan, on Mount Vernon Street, on Mount Vernon Ave, and on Potomac, they already are their parking's already at a premium. Like, I don't think that some of this conversation would have happened if Melrose wasn't already in a parking deficit. And then the city is asking to have people develop more units for their buildings or their houses, or put in in-law, rent an apartment, do something, you know, Airbnb in the back, whatever it is. And the closest public parking lot where you can get a permit for is Berwick Street. And from where I am right now, 185 Main Street, it's 0.9 miles. 9/10 of a mile from here. So I know some neighbors, we have a shared drive here that 5 cars are in. So at least 1 or 2 of those cars is always moving in the street. And they looked into it and they said, I just can't, I can't walk that far in the snow. So there is a municipal yard. If you take 22, I think it was, maybe spaces off the street, then the side streets are full. So when we just had the road work done, the side streets were completely full. Like, it looked like it was somebody was throwing a giant New Year's party in the neighborhood, and it was just people trying to park. I feel like I had a couple other quick things. People are organized now. They would like to work with the city. We would like an answer for Main Street, and then we would like to continue to stay in conversation. So this isn't an end, but just a beginning of relationships that are now opened up. The assessor's office also said the loss of parking will affect market value on the free market. It will not affect technical value per property, according to the assessor, but it will affect what people will pay. I know that my mom bought her house in the 70s for $20,000 and had to fix up all of it, even the ceilings, floors, walls. And now the houses down here are $250,000, pushing $1 million, like money that people never thought they'd see in their lives. And you know, maybe not all of those seniors will stay in their houses for the remainder of their lives, but they'll be able to sell that house at the highest profit, so that they can pay for assisted living, so that they can give things to their kids. And so they feel like that is also being taken from them. So what we're having right now is a conversation about a couple of blocks. Conversation about the greatest bike lane ever. We're talking about a narrow road that needs utility for all, and it's, you know, it doesn't get bigger. You know, it doesn't. You put a bike lane, it doesn't mean that the problems go away. It'd be nice if it did. I hope that, you know, when I in my working life, I guess just to try to wrap myself up here, in my working life, I did gig to gig work. I would assume that when you're planning a project, you do project by project work, really focus on one thing, do it successfully, you move on to the next thing. In my industry, we used to say, you're only as good as your last gig. So I would hope that as the commissioners vote on this project, they see that, you know, they do want to put their name on that. They want to put their name on it professionally. They're comfortable putting their name on it in the community where they're going to see these people, where if there are accidents, if anything happens, that they're not, you know, they're going to be able to live with the decision that they made tonight. And we're going to see what the grocery store, you know, this is tiny town stuff. I've lived in really big towns where you don't know what people look like, but you know, I've seen some of the traffic commissioners in Whole Foods already, and I was just, you know, trying to give them their privacy to not try to talk to them in the grocery store. Yeah, I guess I could still say a lot of other things. I could say that, you know, there's a local business at Sylvan that's really affected. They're a Brazilian-owned gym, a woman-owned gym. Woman's from Brazil, and she has trouble with her classes right now, getting parking in the evening, getting parking in the morning. I know that she tried to send a message to you. I guess it didn't get through. We all want safe travel, and we think that for all the reasons that we've been able to preserve the parking and add sharrows from downtown to Potomac, should be no reason why we can't add sharrows and preserve the parking from Potomac to Sylvan, another 1,582 feet. Thank you for having us here tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the only other person, well, actually we have one in the Q&A that I'm just going to read into the record. It is from Liam McHale, and it says, thank you for taking the time to set up this meeting. I'm a resident living in this area of Melrose and would like to state that my family and myself support the bicycle lanes and multimodal modifications being made to this section of Main Street. I support keeping the bike lanes and road modifications. Slowing speeds and modifying the flow of traffic will make this section of road safer. Melrose needs this. Thank you for your time. Okay, and actually there's a second message from Liam McHale saying, I live on Derby Road with a young family. We need more bike lanes in Melrose. We strongly support the bike lanes on Lower Main. So I think that's it. Finn McSweeney, I see you have your hand back up. I will unmute you now.
Sorry about that, and thank you. I'll be very brief. I just wanted to make sure that on behalf of the Ped Bike Committee, the commissioners did receive and were aware of the almost 400 signatures we obtained in support for this sort of improvement on Lower Main. It's tremendously popular citywide. People want to see this, and we've talked a lot about planning. The last point I'll make is if you go to the Melrose Master Plan from 2017, there's a section which asks residents, what is the single most important characteristic to you that we preserve and maintain in Melrose? And by a long shot, the answer was ability to get around safely by multiple modes of transportation: rail, bus, car, bicycle, on foot. The proposal that we saw in front of the Traffic Commission and that was approved on the 28th is the type of road that Melrosians want to see in Melrose. So that's it. Those are my comments. Thank you, everyone, for the time.
Thank you. Okay. We have 4 folks with their hands still raised from before. I'm going to unmute Bill. I'm just going to unmute you and see if you had your hand raised on purpose.
Yeah, a couple of people were referring to some of what I presented, and I wanted to just reply very quickly, if that's okay.
Yeah, if you can try to keep it brief, just given that we've been going for over 2 hours. But yes, absolutely.
I see. I just wanted to say that what we did is pursuant to the Melrose Traffic Commission statute was exercise our rights to petition. It's in almost every traffic commission statute in the state. It's standard practice because these kinds of decisions have local impact, and it's built in for people to raise these concerns. Second, we were told at the last commission meeting that people pulling into the driveways would be totally allowed if the bike lane came in. So what those pictures show is when a car is parked on the side, how much trucks and buses go over the line, as well as a number of other cars. So we would contend that was legitimate evidence for this commission to consider, given the plan as is given where the center lines are now, and that is supposed to be the center lines with the bike lanes. That's all. I'm keeping it brief on purpose. Thank you for your patience. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, if anyone else was actually still wishing to speak who spoke before, if they can put something in the chat or the Q&A, because I think it's just people with their hands still up from before. Just give people a moment. We do have one last comment in the chat here from Steve Lombardi that says, idea, let's put our design of sharrows and parking on both sides for trial run and let's agree to review it in several months. We had the design bike riders wanted and it was not viable. You had your trial run, let's try ours. So I think that concludes the public testimony. We have a motion to close public comment. Okay, motion made by Commissioner Parenti. Was there a second? Second by Chief Lyle. I saw a bunch of hands come up. I saw his first. So all in favor of closing public testimony?
Aye.
By unanimous consent, public testimony is now closed. So we have 4 items on the agenda. And the first item is, and this was the wording of the petition, the first item was the parking on the west, changing the parking on the west side of Main Street southbound from 244 Main Street south to Sylvan Street. So we can talk about each of the items individually, or if you want to just talk about them as a group, all 4 items that I read in at the beginning of the meeting, that's fine too. Whatever the will is of the commissioners.
I'd suggest taking the whole thing.
Okay. Okay, so the 4, I'll read all 4 then to refresh everybody what we're discussing. It's the parking from 244 Main Street to south to Sylvan Street, the dedicated bike lanes on the east side of Main Street northbound from 338 feet north of the Melrose Malden line to Mount Vernon Street, the dedicated bike lane on the southbound side from 244 Main Street to Sylvan, and amending the code for consistency with existing signage with respect to both parking and time limits on Main Street south of Wyoming to the city limit. So the bike lanes on the southbound side from south of Sylvan were actually not specified in the petition as being brought into question. So so those are the 4 items. Councillor Eccles?
Before I speak on it, it'd be helpful to understand how we go from here tonight based on posting requirements and the way that the petition goes and the implementation.
Yes. So the items that if we vote consistent with what we voted on October 28th, then we've already posted for 2 weeks in the newspaper that's still printed, which I believe is the Weekly News. We've already posted all of our decisions from October 28th, including everything, including electric vehicle charging lanes, restrictions and crosswalks and everything. So if we vote the same, then all those votes stand, and we don't have to republish those. The only exception is that in the ad and on the agenda, rather than Mount Vernon Street, I wrote Mount Vernon Ave mistakenly. I would contend that the discussion was very clear that we were talking about Mount Vernon Street and not Mount Vernon Ave. I think the commissioners were aware. I think the public was aware that those were the limits we were discussing. However, you know, from a technicality perspective, it is correct. That is not what we put in the newspaper. And so the bike lane from the 338 feet, I believe it is, north of the city limit up to Mount Vernon Street would have to be put in the newspaper again for 2 more weeks if we decide that we still want to approve that. If we vote something different tonight, then we would have to put whatever that new vote is into the newspaper for another 2 weeks.
And on the Mount Vernon Ave issue, would that be something we could vote on at our regularly scheduled meeting, which I think is December 15th, because there would be 2 weeks before that if we.
Well, so we can vote on it tonight and then publish it for 2 weeks. And
I
then,
see. Okay.
and then we're all set. But the only thing is that if, you know, a potential delay tactic for the project could be for folks to file another petition about just that one item. But if all other items passed and we were painting, we can, after the publication last Friday, we can now paint all the crosswalks because those aren't part of tonight's discussion. So, you know, we can paint the crosswalks. After tonight, we could paint everything else other than that northbound bike lane if everything was approved again. And so, you know, to file another petition just about the northbound bike lane, if everything else passes, it would appear to be simply a delay tactic. The unfortunate thing is that at this time of year, it's very difficult to paint anything at all. And so our painting contractor has indicated that they've wrapped up for the season and we're unlikely to get them back until the spring. We are hopeful that we can maybe get, if we have one unseasonably warm day, we can just detour the road and do some painting, at least get the crosswalks down. I think we've actually created a less safe situation by putting in just the center line and then leaving it for the whole winter. The whole idea of the traffic calming is that you paint those fog lines with the 11-foot travel lanes, and that's what slows the traffic. And so painting a center line and leaving it is, you know, it does nothing compared to what was there before. It's still just a center line and then pavement. So those are really the paths forward, and the question as to how quickly we can paint anything. In addition to the legal requirement to post for the bike lane, the weather, the temperature, and the contractor. Chief.
Just a quick question, what Dan brought up, are we voting on all 4 items at once, or are we gonna break it up individually?
We'll vote on them separately still.
Okay.
But
okay,
we're
thank
gonna
you.
discuss all 4 together so that we're not repeating discussion.
I just have a technical question here. Can you guys still see me? I seem to have lost you all, but I can hear you as long as you can hear me. Can you hear me?
We can see and hear you just fine.
Isn't that funny? I can't find how to get back in and I'm afraid to go back out. So I can't see you, but I am still here.
Okay, maybe it just be a matter of finding the Cisco tab down at the bottom of your screen.
That's what I'm looking for, and it's gone. So I can't figure out why I can hear you, but that's okay. 'Cause I won't move so that you can still see me, I guess, and hear me.
Okay.
Funny, I don't know. Do you think I should jump out? Should I jump out?
If you want to jump out and back in, or if you want to just try, if you want to try closing any other windows you have open, maybe you'll be behind something or.
Yeah, not to get into a technical discussion, but if you do Control Tab, you will see a small selection of all your windows, and you might see one with our faces.
I'm gonna jump out and jump back in.
Okay.
Can I ask a process question while Mayor Infern is doing that?
Sure.
Do we have options aside from an up and down vote? Is there an avenue open where we can make an amendment to the decision we made previously now that this is reopened? There were a few people who testified that the proposal that we made does not go far enough, and I'm wondering if we have latitude in both directions here.
It's an interesting question. I mean, typically we have, when we've wanted to be able to discuss things more broadly and perhaps not only decide on one particular option, we've tried to state that on the agenda, advertise the agenda broadly enough that it's obvious what we're covering. I would say, given that this is a public hearing relative to a petition on 4 specific items, that we probably need to just vote up or down on each of those 4 items. But at a future traffic commission meeting, we can always reopen a discussion on something different if we chose to.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Chief.
I have a question as far as item 2, then adding the bike lanes on the east side of Main Street. Based on the numbers that were presented from the pilot, where we flip-flopped it from the bike lane from outside to inside to the curb, when you add up the numbers, it seems to me that we're about 2 feet plus short on the width. I went down there today and I measured all over the place. I spent a good hour and a half. And it seems to me that we're 2 feet plus short.
On the northbound side?
Northbound, yes, based on where the yellow line or the stripes are, yep.
So
And
we
the,
should have, let's see, if the road was roughly 41 feet. It's funny, I went out there and was measuring all sorts of things today, but I was only measuring on the southbound side.
I did that, yep.
But if we have 41 feet, yeah, there should be at a minimum 23 feet on the northbound side, which would be an 11-foot travel lane, a 7-foot parking lane, and a 5-foot bike lane. So that comes out right to 23.
Well, based on the pilot, what's written down here, it's 11 foot, a 7.5 parking lane, a 1.5 foot buffer stripe lane for the bicycle, and then a 5-foot bike lane.
Yeah, so we moved that buffer, we moved the buffer to the other side at the last meeting. We opted to move, as part of the final recommended plan, we moved the buffer onto the southbound side because that would give people a little bit more room to pull out of their driveways. Originally, it was a 5-foot bike lane on the southbound side with then no buffer, and then the 11-foot travel lane. But we moved that buffer onto the southbound side so that the center line wouldn't be quite so off center.
So when I looked at the southbound side, it varies. Up by 278, it's 17 feet wide. Down at 238, it's 16.7. And that's a pretty good number, 16.7, 16.8. So if you over there, we just finish, please. But if you moved it over to that side, the southbound side, it gives you 11-foot travel lane, 5-foot bike lane, and then you really have nothing for any type of a fog lane or buffer lane to the curb.
Were you measuring to the center of the center line, or you went from the curb to the?
Yeah, that's not the center of it is. That's considered a non-travel lane. So you shouldn't.
Sure. No, I was just curious.
Yeah, I went right to the edge. Yeah.
I measured. Were you measuring with a tape measure or a wheel?
Wheel.
Yeah, I measured with a wheel as well. I measured at. So interestingly, the most narrow point of the entire southbound lane that I measured was in the area that we did not restripe in front of the Ionic 306 Main Street. Or maybe that's not 306, in front of the Ionic building, the second apartment building down.
Yep.
From the curb to the edge of the double yellow, the beginning of the double yellow was 16 feet 7 inches. And then from there, outside 306 Main Street, still in the spot before where we repaved, where we didn't restripe, then it went to 18 feet. And then throughout the area that we restriped, it was 17 feet 2 inches, 17 feet 3 inches, 17 feet 9 inches, 17 feet 2 inches, 17 feet 4 inches. I just measured 5 spots in the area.
Yeah, I went from 278, 238, 212, 180, 164. And it varied from 17 feet to 16.7. And I went from the curb to the edge of the yellow line. Not
that's
into the yellow line.
That's the same that I was doing, right to the edge of the yellow line. So
I mean, obviously this thing is not a calibrated, certified, measuring device, but it's approximate. That's my only concern. And everybody in this commission knows that Main Street is a dedicated truck route.
yes, and the 11-foot travel lanes are a given one way or another. It's the buffer and the bike lanes that and the parking lanes that would vary. Right. When we go to stripe it with the fog lines, the way the company would do it is they actually just set an offset from the center of the double yellow, and they just set their machine, and then they just go. And so the 11-foot travel lanes would be consistent the whole way. Yeah, and then everything else the buffer is what would probably, lose, if anything, and then maybe.
Well, I get it. The road does vary, and it's surprising that a road isn't exactly, even all the way through. It moves in and out slightly. I get that. That was just an interesting point. That's all.
Yeah, and I found it interesting that the narrowest point that I measured was not even in the area that we restriped. I was surprised to find outside the Ionic there that it was.
Folks call me, question me as far as the bend in the area 278, that area where the actual, I'll call it the sharpest area of the turn, and up there, and I was surprised that it was wider than some of the other areas. So.
Yeah, and I do think that I drove it many times in the last 2 weeks, and a lot of it really does depend on your speed. If you go 25 miles an hour through that whole corridor, it is very easy to stay in the lines, whether someone's parked on the right-hand side or not, in both directions. But the reality is a lot of people are not going the speed limit. But I think once we paint the fog lines, that would that would increase speed,
Good.
increase the likelihood of people going the speed limit.
Two last points. I have a CDL, so I know what it's like to drive a semi and a tractor trailer, so I understand that. But there was someone, Estelle, wanted to know about, failure to pull over for an officer, emergency lights or an ambulance. It's $100 fine, and you have to use reasonableness when you pull people over. If they're doing their best to get to the side of the road, whether it's a one-lane road or a super highway, it's a judgment call. Anytime in Melrose, when we're going down Main Street, for instance, everybody's splitting the road for us, or an ambulance or a fire engine, whatever it may be, an emergency vehicle. So very seldom in a city you'll see someone cited for that. Maybe on the Parkway, but not in the Main Street Melrose. That's all I have. Thank you.
Helpful. Sergeant Gawk, I have a couple questions for you, if you don't mind. I was curious. So in discussing with some residents leading up to tonight's meeting, I heard some comments about bus routes and, the bus having adequate space to pull over and cars be able to get around them. And I was driving on Franklin, Upham, Lebanon, other streets that have bus traffic, which are all much narrower than Main Street. And so I'm just curious, do we have problems with crashes that result from people going around buses?
Right, good question. I know it was brought up earlier by one of the citizens with the pictures and stuff. And obviously it's a natural occurrence in a lot of our main arteries in the city, Franklin Street, Main Street. And what generally happens is in most of these areas, the sight lines are very good, which would be the same thing as this corridor on Main Street that we're discussing. So if a bus pulls over and let's say it's not all the way against the curb, the average driver will maybe stop for a minute, slow down, and then they'll look, and if it's safe to go left and pass the bus a little, if they go over the line a little, that's generally what happens all the time. It's sort of a natural occurrence. And again, the reasonable, proper, prudent driver will only do that, seeing the sight lines of the other lane coming at them and knowing that it's safe to do so. So I don't see that as an issue. Certainly it could happen where there could be an accident. It would obviously be the driver's fault for going around the bus when it isn't safe to do so, especially if they crossed over the center line.
Elena?
Yeah.
If I may help out with the Sarge here, I actually checked some of the other areas in the city, and surprising, West Wyoming Ave is probably the narrowest. Heading eastbound on West Wyoming, some areas of that road are 9 feet, 10 inches, 9 feet, 7. So that's pretty narrow lane, especially going by the Lincoln School. That is the narrowest I could find today.
Just kind of following up on the accident question. Do we have any other history of accidents on that section of Main Street? I know that the new centerline move hasn't been there long enough for there probably to be history, but even during the trial period with the other configuration, were there any accidents or many accidents that happened?
Right, Tom. We had the one in front of the McDonough house. They live in on the southbound area. The accident occurred at nighttime. It was dark, I think in September, and it could have been October. And what happened was the parking lanes were the ones that were projected out at the time. So people were parking 6 feet out from the curb as the design was in that design stage of the trial. So there was the McDonough's car was parked, 6 feet off the curb. A party was driving northbound, and they approached that area at a significant speed. And they said that the car in front of them slammed on the brakes, took a quick left onto, I think, potentially Woodruff. I'm not sure which side road. And that caused them to, they said, steer to the right as the car was going left, and they slammed directly into the parked vehicle. Had they been going the speed limit and paying attention and potentially not following too close, that accident would never have happened. It wasn't so much that the car was parked where it was 6 feet off the curb. I know we're changing that anyway, but it was more, again, driver error, speed, failure to pay attention, following too close. That's what happened with that accident. As far as the rest of the area in the past couple months, I know of nothing in particular. Could there have been a minor accident? Possibly. I don't recall anything that I have had to be really aware of. And the general history in that area, it's hard to get the general history in the area because I didn't look it up. I did do a 5-year look back, but it was just this afternoon. The average on Main Street, for a year is something in the effect of 55 accidents a year, but that's the entire city. So I just don't have the direct data in that corridor, but if I had to guess, it's definitely not come to my attention that it's a problem area that we're talking about. And that was a pretty serious accident involving the parked car, but it was absolute operator error. And it was speed.
I just wanted to make one point that seems to be coming up a lot in terms of the process and the involvement of the neighborhood and the timeline and such. Just so that the public and the commission too understands what the timeline actually was from the city perspective. So, and we go into detail on this on the webpage with the recommended plan as well, but the city identified this as a priority project for a road diet back in 2017 when we did the Complete Streets Prioritization Plan. And we identified it as needing to be paved in 2018, I believe it first was. And then after that point, the city was not working on a design for the road diet until this summer or late spring, June timeframe of this year. So we have an ongoing relationship with the Ped Bike Committee. We used to have monthly meetings with the Ped Bike Committee where we would say, these are our upcoming projects. If you have any ideas, if you have any, sort of a wish list, we'd love to hear it. Similarly with the North-South bike route, when we were doing that, we asked the Ped Bike Committee, hey, here's something great you can do. Come up with what you think would be the best routes for the North-South bike route. And then when we were ready to design the North-South bike route, we looked at the report that the committee prepared and we said, okay, we like these ideas and we don't like those ideas. I remember one big one was Greenwood, going down Greenwood from Franklin Street, which I said, well, that's fine and good until you get into Wakefield and it's all curves and narrow and really not very safe for that to be a residential route for the less comfortable cyclist. I thought that's a really tough route. So we opted for going up Highland and Briggs and that route instead. So, we solicit the opinions of the Ped Bike Committee because they're a very active and very knowledgeable group with a lot of people who work in this industry and know about transportation design. And so that happened in this case too. The Ped Bike Committee, probably around 2019 timeframe, because I believe it was before COVID, had put together a report that was, again, a wish list report of what the committee thought would be great for Lower Main Street. The city didn't start to consider what our proposed design was for the pilot project until about a month before our first meeting. And at the first meeting in July, that's where we presented what we were thinking of doing. We talked to Ped Bike, we talked to the MAPC, who was offering us some free technical assistance. And we picked out what we thought we might want to see from the Ped Bike plan and from other ideas that we had internally, and we put together the pilot project. So there was not this protracted period during which the city staff were planning and not involving the residents of Melrose outside of the Ped Bike Committee. And I just can't stress that enough. We're doing, one of the residents said something about doing one project at a time, you know, and then moving on to the next. We're doing 10 to 15 roadway and utility projects, capital projects at any given time. We're designing them, we're constructing them, we're in various phases of many projects at once. And so we realized that we were nearing the fall for when we thought we could get paving done. And, you know, understanding that Eversource was finally done and National Grid was finally done and we had finally finished our water improvements. And then we said, okay, what are we going to do? And that was the time frame. So there was about a month. We talked to Ped Bike, we talked to MAPC, we put together the meeting notice in the July meeting, we put together a presentation. We held the meeting and then we did the striping 2 weeks later, and then we did the survey, and then we did the in-person neighborhood meeting, the meeting at the Learning Commons that was both virtual and in person. And we hand delivered notices to the Main Street abutters, to the immediate abutters for several of those meetings. We also did Everbridge calls to the wider neighborhood. Pretty much everybody south of Wyoming got an Everbridge call for each of the community-wide meetings. And so I have a hard time with the lack of, you know, the claims of a lack of involvement. Perhaps the residents would have liked it if we spent longer having the discussion. It was, you know, a fairly short time frame from June up until now. But I think we had robust discussions at every meeting. I'm not sure there are too many discussions or ideas that, I don't think there are viable ideas that weren't considered or that would have been considered had we had more time. So my personal feeling is that we made the decisions that we made in October with a wealth of information and a lot of public input. And there was no decision that was going to make everybody happy. And I do feel that the decision we arrived at was a compromise. And it was a compromise that I felt comfortable with then and continue to feel comfortable with, recognizing that there are challenges in every direction with the proposed plan, but I think it's an appropriate balance for this particular roadway. Anyone else have any thoughts, or anyone like to make any motions? Councilor Eccles?
Just on, you know, kind of what's before us tonight and any new information we might have had, specifically, you know, some of those exhibits that were presented. I appreciate, you know, the time that everyone took to show up to this meeting and gather information. The real truth of the matter is that the configuration that's on South Main Street right now is not the one that any of us voted for. So looking at pictures of it and issues it might be causing, that's not really what my intention was with the street, with the parking on the southbound lane, forcing people into the other travel lane. I mean, a car with enough space to pass it safely is about like 8 feet wide, and that's not the same as what the bike lane would have been. So that being kind of most of the only new information that we hadn't been presented with, I do agree with you, Elena, that, you know, the process was extensive. I was able to, we had, even the week that we voted, we had the meeting at the high school. It came before the council because Councilor McMaster put it forward as a neighborhood issue. And then we had the traffic commission meeting. So I felt like I heard from many members of the public personally and in the meetings, and I will stick with my vote that I took on October 28th.
Anyone else? Tom?
I think that we all agree that the primary consideration we have is safety, that safety kind of trumps everything else. But safety also is not just for, for the drivers, it's also for the bicyclists and the pedestrians. And I think that that's what we weighed in our previous discussions and our previous deliberations and ultimately our vote, whether it was safer, overall to have the bike lanes, which does make it safer for the bicyclists, in my opinion, and acknowledging that, everything is somewhat of a trade-off, but I didn't see that it was terribly more hazardous for the drivers, with the configuration we voted on compared to what it was before the trial. I did appreciate the exhibits that we saw that were presented by the I think it was Mr. Gordon. And I understand that they, the parked car was, sort of a proxy for a car pulling into the driveway. We know that cars won't be allowed to be parking there under what was voted on, but that there will still be at some times cars there, whether they're pulling into driveways, which is really just a few seconds, or pulling out of driveways, or sometimes when someone stops to pick someone up or drop someone off, or an Amazon truck or whatever. So there will be times when that happens, and there certainly will be times when cars cross over the center line. I don't think that necessarily creates a huge hazard by itself. As we've all noted, the sight lines are very good there. So pulling over across the line generally happens when someone can see that there's not another car coming. One of the reasons I asked about the accident history, because if there were head-on accidents, which is the kind that you would be worried about with cars crossing the center line, we would know about them. And we do know that happens in other parts of the city where the streets aren't as wide. So ultimately, I do think that what we voted on last time was safer overall. And obviously there is a benefit of, encouraging, more people to not use their cars, even though I think the overall, it's not that, I don't think this is going to, eliminate congestion in Melrose or anything like that, but it is better to give people another option for, besides driving. So that's why I had my vote, the way it was last time. And I do think we did see some new evidence, but in my view, it wasn't enough to cause me to want to switch over.
Dan?
Just one point on the exhibits, and I do appreciate everybody who came forward on all sides of the issue and took the time. One thing you noticed in those pictures was that there was often a fair amount of distance between the vehicle going over the line and the parked vehicle. The bike lane would be even narrower. And I think part of the reason for that difference is that there's no fog line there right now, which I think would tend to keep people in the lane and guide them forward. So again, I kind of agree with what Tom said about it. There will be times with no parking where people pull into a driveway. People may go a little further out to for one reason or another, but it's not likely to be the issue that it appeared to be in those pictures. I'll also say, as a cyclist and one who's feels fortunate to be able to cycle at all at my age, there's no question in my mind that bike lane is safer than Sharrow's and safer than an unused parking lane that has a car every now and then. It's just a no-brainer if you ride a cycle regularly on city streets. Thanks.
Thanks. I do want to mention one thing that I hadn't mentioned before, which is that the striping of the center line, and part of the reason why Mr. Gordon was presenting the pictures that he did, is that I had indicated that the reason why we felt confident in putting down the center line was that the center line where it is can accommodate any vote up or down of any of the items that are on the agenda tonight. And that would assume that the, in its narrowest points, there's a 6.5-foot parking lane and an 11-foot travel lane on that southbound side. And so that would be part of the reason why Mr. Gordon was presenting, if there's a car parked there, a large truck or something might cross the double yellow to get around the parked car. And I, like I said, I drove and I parked my car a lot down there in the last few days and just watched people's behavior. And it was generally the people going too fast who go out, in terms of cars, who go out around that far around another car. It's because there's nobody coming the other direction and they just don't feel like slowing down. And so they just, drive fast and go around. So I think the photos were valid points, but I also go back to, the configuration that this board voted for before, that no longer is relevant when it becomes a bike lane and not a parking lane, except for the occasion when someone pulls over to pull in a driveway or to drop off a package or whatnot. It's largely irrelevant. And then the fact that it's even narrower in an area where we do allow parking just after Wyoming, that the travel lane and the parking lane total are narrower than anything we did south of where the paving limit was. So obviously, it's a layout that the city has found acceptable in the past in terms of widths and has not had a problem with people having crashes or crossing the double yellow. Mayor Inferno, did you have comments?
I do. They haven't changed too much from the last meeting. And while I understand that this is Main Street and it's used by many, it's also a residential area with a couple of businesses on it. So I think that makes a difference when we consider bike lanes here. Main Street is mostly a shared street going starting from Wakefield all the way down. It's a shared street. We go right through downtown Melrose as a shared street. So we're looking at about 200 yards of a bike lane. And I'm not quite sure, and once again, that I'm very hesitant to support any of this, because for 200 yards, we're really disrupting the neighborhood and making a big change in the neighborhood. We always try to be consistent with our signage, which, with everything that we're doing throughout the city. And if we have Main Street as a shared road, except for about 200 yards of this, because then we go right after Sylvan Street, you can park again once you get through, I was going to say the old NHD parking lot. Once you get by Hunt's, you can park again. So I think we're being a little inconsistent for the bike rider going down, that they're going to come down Main Street all the way as a shared street, if they choose to stay on Main Street through the center of the city, and then they have just 200 yards of a bike lane. I'm not quite sure that I can support that in a residential area where it's going to disrupt people's lives and be a safety issue for, the pedestrians as they go back and forth, and the parked cars that could be, impacting the side streets, because now during a holiday, during visitors, during, anything, that visitors aren't parking on that in about 200 yards of that Main Street. So I am still going to not support this. I certainly support bikers and their lanes, but I think Main Street is Main Street, and it looks different than other streets. And for 200 yards, I'm just not sure if I can support this at this time. I did have one question, and it was what Mr. Lombard put in the question, and I just want you to answer it. I'm not looking for it, but maybe to answer it as to another trial. If you painted as a shared street, and did that as another trial, what would that be like? And I think the answer would be is that it's hard to get rid of that paint, and it will always be there, no matter if, you know, if we wanted to change it after the trial.
Well, even if we were to do a trial of something different, we still wouldn't move the center line. I think the center line, you know, the center line makes a lot of sense where it is. You could stripe all of the northbound bike lane and parking lane, and on the southbound side, you could just stripe the fog lane and, you know, see how that goes. I think there are some serious safety drawbacks with not having the dedicated bike lane. And also, I think honestly, pulling in and out of driveways is safer when there's nobody parked blocking sight lines than when people are parked there. So I think from a safety perspective, the proposed project makes more sense. But you know, could we keep trying to let the southbound side be shared? We could. I wouldn't recommend having the northbound side be shared though, because I think since we have room for a bike lane in one direction, we should at the very least take advantage of that. Liz?
Does it make sense to look at the southbound lane as a shared road? Like I say, it's about 200 yards. I don't know. I don't know what I personally don't understand the sense of it for 200 yards when we have all of Main Street as a shared street from Wakefield down. And then we're taking this 200 yards.
Well, we do have a lot of dedicated bike lanes though, from Wakefield down to Highland. And then
that's about it.
And we have along Whole Foods, there's a dedicated lane. And then as you come through Hospital Square, there's a dedicated lane. And then along Fire Station, I guess it kind of acts as a dedicated lane, although it's no parking anyway because of Fire Station. And then there would be this portion from Potomac all the way to the city limit would have a dedicated bike lane. So I think it's a substantial segment of Main Street that would have a dedicated bike lane. I think what's different about this is that you have to change parking in order to get it along those couple hundred yards. And yes, that is different than all of the other locations. And is really, again, just a judgment call of it's a give and take.
Thank you really for the work. And I think the residents kind of come out and been heard. There has been a good process. I wasn't part of a lot of it because I just kind of got on the traffic commission in the sense. But I think the process has been a good one. It's just a tough one, I think.
Did you have comments?
Yeah, I'll be brief. I just wanted to echo what my colleagues here have said. Just thanking all the input that we received tonight and the pictures and the passion on this issue. And with that, I will leave it at that. And assume that we'll be moving to a vote soon.
I'll make a motion to prohibit parking on the west side of Main Street southbound from about 244 Main Street, continuing south to Sylvan Street.
I'll second it.
We have a motion by Commissioner Kretschmer and seconded by Commissioner Parenti to restrict parking from 244 Main Street south to Sylvan Street.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
So I agree with that's the intent, right, to restrict parking, but the actual agenda says changing. Is that an issue?
So that was the wording of the petition.
Okay.
So these are the 4 items that the petition asked us to reconsider. So we decided to go with literally those very words. But in terms of the motion, I think it's appropriate to have it be restricting parking because that is what the original motion did that was questioned by the petition.
Understood. Thanks.
Okay, any further discussion? All right, seeing none, I'll call the roll. Commissioner Kretschmer,
Yes.
Commissioner Peart,
Yes.
Mayor Inferno. I didn't hear you, but I know you said no.
Yes, correct. No.
Councillor Eccles,
Yes.
Commissioner Parenti,
Yes.
Commissioner Rossi,
Yes.
Chief Lyle,
No.
and I am voting yes. So we have 6 yes and 2 no. So the motion carries to restrict parking from 244 Main Street to Sylvan, to prohibit parking from 244 Main Street down to Sylvan on the southbound side or the west side of Main Street. Okay, the next item is adding dedicated bike lanes on the east side of Main Street, northbound from 338 feet north of the Melrose Malden city limit to Mount Vernon Street.
So move.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Kretschmer, seconded by Commissioner Parenti, to approve the dedicated bike lane from approximately 338 feet north of the Malden Melrose limit, north to Mount Vernon Street. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll call the roll. Commissioner Kretschmer,
Yes.
Commissioner Peart,
Yes.
Mayor Inferno. I don't know why we can't hear you when you're voting. Say it again. Yes. Okay. Oh, you're muted, but we know you said, I heard you say yes. I mean, I saw you say yes. Yeah, I'm going to unmute you. I just unmuted you. Councillor Eccles,
Yes.
Parenti,
Yes.
Commissioner Rossi,
Yes.
Chief Lyle.
No.
Okay, so we have 7 yes and 1 no. So the motion carries to put in the bike lane on the northbound side as specified. The next item is adding a dedicated bike lane on Main Street southbound, the west side from 244 Main Street to Sylvan Street. Note that the bike lane south of Sylvan Street was not questioned in the petition, so that is already approved. So any discussion or motion?
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Peart, seconded by Commissioner Parenti. Any further discussion? All right, seeing none, I'll call the roll. Commissioner Kretschmer,
Yes.
Commissioner Peart,
Yes.
Mayor Inferno. I think you said no. I don't know.
I said no. Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
I can see you talking. I think when you talk so briefly, it just does, the mic just doesn't pick it up for that split second.
No.
Okay. Councillor Eccles,
Yes.
Commissioner Parenti,
Yes.
Commissioner Rossi,
Yes.
Chief Lyle.
No.
Okay, so we have 2 no. I'm also a yes. So 6 yes, 2 no. So the motion carries to approve the bike lane southbound from 244 Main Street thereabouts to Sylvan. And finally, amending the Melrose traffic code for consistency with existing signage on Main Street, both sides, south of Wyoming Avenue to the Melrose Malden city limit as it pertains to parking restrictions and time limits. And just as a reminder, this was really just procedural. This was not making any changes. And this would be, the petition left out some of the wording on that, but it is except as otherwise voted previously in this meeting. And I think that's critical. That's a critical piece of that motion from our original language. So it would not supersede any of the other votes we've taken tonight. But what it would do is just have the traffic code match existing signage. So if outside, let's say the apartment buildings just after Wyoming, if the sign says 2-hour parking and the code says 1-hour parking, we would update the code to say 2-hour parking. So is that clear?
But it would also include no parking from 244 Main Street to Sylvan.
It would not, it's not intended to supersede any prior votes from tonight. It's just in the areas where we didn't vote on something that relates to restrictions to make the traffic code match what's on the existing signage out in the world. So, you know, aside from anything we've voted on previously tonight, or previously at the October 28th meeting, anything there that still stands would still carry. This is just cleaning up the traffic code in other locations along the corridor to match the existing signage.
Motion.
Okay,
Second.
motion by Chief Lyle, seconded by Commissioner Rossi. Any other questions, discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the roll. Commissioner Kretschmer.
Yes.
Commissioner Parrott.
Yes.
Mayor Inferna.
Yes.
Counselor Eccles.
Yes.
Parenti.
Yes.
Commissioner Rossi.
Yes.
Chief Lyle.
Yes.
Okay, and I'm yes as well, so that carries unanimously. So that concludes this public hearing and vote. The whole meeting has been recorded and will be available upon request. Just note to the those listening in, the Traffic Commission doesn't normally post our recordings. We normally post minutes, but we were without a clerk for these last several meetings. And so we made the recordings available upon request, and the last one we made available on the website. We can do that again, although we should have minutes hopefully soon, because the great news is our new clerk started work today. So I decided this wouldn't be a fair first day for her. But she will be provided the recording, and she will be making minutes from this meeting as well as the last meeting. And another employee was doing the minutes from the earlier October meeting. So we should have all of those minutes for our December meeting in draft form for our approval.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, motion to adjourn by Chief Lyle, seconded by Commissioner Rossi. All in favor, raise your hand. Okay, we have unanimous consent, so the meeting is adjourned by unanimous consent at 8:36 p.m. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.